Blood seeped between Eleanor Hargrove's fingers as she worked. The bullet had lodged itself deep in the stranger's shoulder, nestled against bone. Outside, the New Mexico sun beat down mercilessly on the lone stagecoach stop, known to travelers as Last Water. "Hold still," she commanded, her voice calm, despite the crimson pool spreading across her wooden operating table. "I almost have it." The man, tall, gaunt, with the hardened features of someone who'd seen too much of the frontier's cruelty, bit down on the leather strap between his teeth. His eyes, pale blue like a winter sky, watched her with a mixture of pain and calculation. Eleanor's forceps found the lead ball. She extracted it with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd pulled countless bullets from countless bodies. The war had taught her that much, at least. The first gunshot outside barely registered. In the 5 years since establishing Last Water, drunken cowboys occasionally fired celebratory rounds into the sky upon arrival. But the second shot, followed by a woman's scream, froze the blood in Eleanor's veins. Hannah. Eleanor's head snapped toward the window. Through the dust-caked glass, she caught glimpses of movement riders circling the main building. At least 7 of them, all armed. "Hannah!" she called out, momentarily forgetting her patient. The wounded man grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. "Finish," he rasped. "You start something, you finish it." Eleanor hesitated, torn between her duty as a healer and her instinct as a mother. Through the window, she could see more riders appearing, surrounding the stagecoach stop. The sound of Hannah's voice had gone silent. 5 seconds. That's all she needed to close this man up. 5 seconds that would haunt her forever. "God help me," she whispered, turning back to the bleeding wound. Her needle flashed in the lamplight as she made 3 quick, precise sutures. The door to the surgery room burst open. Old Wilkins, the retired lawman who helped run the station, stood there with a shotgun in his trembling hands. His white mustache quivered with each labored breath. "They're here for something, Ellie," he wheezed. "Calling themselves the Rattlesnake Gang. Mean-looking bunch." Another shot rang out, followed by the distinctive sound of breaking glass. "Hannah?" Eleanor asked, tying off the last suture. Wilkins shook his head. "Haven't seen her since she went to fetch water." Eleanor's world narrowed to a pinpoint. She grabbed her deceased husband's Navy Colt from the drawer beneath the operating table and checked the chambers. "Watch him," she ordered Wilkins, nodding toward her patient. "He tries anything, shoot him." The wounded man's eyes followed her, but he made no move to stop her. Eleanor stepped into the hallway just as the main door of the stagecoach stop crashed inward. 2 men entered, both wearing bandanas pulled up over their faces, both training revolvers on her. Behind them, flames had already begun to lick at the outer walls of the station. "Where is it?" the taller one demanded. Eleanor raised her pistol. "Where's my daughter?" The second man laughed, a sound like stones grinding together. "The girl's insurance, ma'am. You give us what we came for, you get her back." "I don't know what you're talking about." Eleanor's finger tightened on the trigger. "Where is she?" A shot exploded from behind her from the surgery room. Eleanor's heart stopped. Wilkins. The momentary distraction cost her. Something hard slammed into the back of her head and the world tilted sideways. As consciousness faded, she heard one of the men say, "The judge wants everything burned. No loose ends." Then darkness took her. The field hospital stank of gangrene and despair. Outside, the sounds of artillery pounded a relentless rhythm that matched the throbbing in Eleanor's temples. 3 days without sleep. 3 days of blood and screaming and death. "Nurse Hargrove." The voice cut through the fog of exhaustion. "I need you here." Eleanor moved automatically toward the voice, toward another broken body on another blood-stained cot. This one wore a colonel's insignia, though the uniform was so caked with mud and blood that rank seemed meaningless now. "You're the angel they told me about," the colonel said, his voice surprisingly steady for a man with a chest wound. "The one who doesn't lose patience." "I lose plenty," Eleanor replied, cutting away the ruined uniform. "Just not without a fight." The colonel smiled through blood-flecked lips. "Robert Hargrove. Remember the name. If I live, I'm going to marry you." Despite everything, the carnage, the hopelessness, the bone-deep fatigue, Eleanor found herself smiling back. "If you live," she said, "I might even say yes." Eleanor awoke to heat and the acrid smell of smoke. The stagecoach stop was burning around her. Flames licked at the wooden beams overhead, sending sparks drifting down like deadly fireflies. Her head throbbed where she'd been struck, and when she touched the spot, her fingers came away wet with blood. "Wilkins!" She called out, her voice barely audible over the crackling of the fire. "Hannah!" She struggled to her feet, swaying as the room spun around her. The surgery room door stood open. Inside, Wilkins lay sprawled across the floor, a dark stain spreading across his chest. The wounded stranger was nowhere to be seen. Eleanor knelt beside the old lawman. His eyes fluttered open at her touch. "Ran when they shot me," he wheezed. "Your patient. One of them." "Where's Hannah?" Eleanor demanded, even as her practiced hands assessed Wilkins' wound. The bullet had pierced his lung. There was nothing she could do. Wilkins' gnarled fingers closed around something in his pocket. With tremendous effort, he extracted a crumpled piece of paper and pressed it into her hand. "Found this on one of them," he gasped. "Snake symbol and the courthouse mark." Eleanor glanced at the paper, a crude drawing of a rattlesnake coiled around what appeared to be the county courthouse. Before she could make sense of it, Wilkins seized her wrist. "They knew what they were looking for," he said, each word a struggle. "Something about the colonel's treasure." A beam crashed down nearby, sending up a shower of embers. The heat was becoming unbearable. "Go," Wilkins urged. "Find Hannah." "Not without you." But even as she said it, Eleanor saw the light fading from the old man's eyes. His grip on her wrist slackened. "Tell her I'm sorry. Couldn't protect." The last words died with him. Eleanor closed his eyes gently, allowing herself only a moment of grief before the urgency of the situation reasserted itself. The main room was now fully engulfed in flames. Eleanor navigated through the smoke, staying low, making her way to the back door. Outside, the night air felt shockingly cool against her soot-covered skin. The stagecoach stop her home for 5 years was a roaring inferno against the star-filled sky. "Hannah!" she screamed, searching desperately around the burning building. "Hannah!" Only the crackling of flames answered her. A sound behind her made Eleanor whirl, raising the Colt she'd somehow managed to keep hold of during the attack. The wounded man from her surgery table stood there, leaning heavily against the water pump. Blood had soaked through his bandages, but he remained upright through what seemed like sheer force of will. "They took her west," he said, nodding toward the distant mountains. "Rattlesnake Canyon." Eleanor kept the gun trained on him. "You're one of them." It wasn't a question. The man didn't deny it. "Name's Jackson. And yes, I ride with the rattlesnakes." "Or did." "Why should I believe anything you say?" Eleanor's finger tensed on the trigger. "Because I owe you my life," Jackson replied. "And because they left me here to die, same as you." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "What do they want?" "Why take my daughter?" Jackson slid down until he was sitting on the ground, his back against the pump. "They're looking for something your husband hid. Something valuable. The girl's leverage." "My husband's been dead 5 years," Eleanor said. "Whatever he had died with him." "The judge doesn't think so." "What judge?" Jackson opened his mouth to answer, but was interrupted by a fit of coughing. Fresh blood stained his lips. "You tore your stitches," Eleanor observed, professional instinct momentarily overriding her suspicion. "Doesn't matter," Jackson said. "Listen to me. Your husband, Colonel Robert Hargrove, he was a hero to some, a traitor to others. Before he died, he hid something that powerful men have been searching for ever since." "Robert was a lot of things," Eleanor said, "but he wasn't a thief." "Didn't say he was." Jackson's eyes, those pale blue eyes that had watched her so carefully earlier, held hers. "But he knew something. Something that could ruin men like Judge Caldwell. That's why they've come for you now. Someone talked. Someone told them you might have what they were looking for." Eleanor lowered her gun slowly. "Judge Augustus Caldwell." "The circuit judge?" Jackson nodded. "The same." "That's impossible. He was Robert's friend. He spoke at his funeral." "Friends make the best enemies, ma'am." Eleanor turned away, her mind racing. Augustus Caldwell had been her husband's commanding officer during the war, and later his strongest defender, when rumors of misconduct had swirled around Robert's death. The idea that he could be behind this attack seemed absurd. "Your daughter doesn't have much time," Jackson said. "They'll keep her alive only as long as they think you can lead them to whatever they're looking for." The surgery building's roof collapsed with a thunderous crash, sending a plume of sparks into the night sky. Eleanor watched her life's work burn and something hardened inside her. I need to search what's left of the house, she said. If Robert hid something here, I need to find it before the fire takes everything. Jackson struggled to his feet. I'll help you. Eleanor gave him a long look. Why? Why turn against your own gang? A bitter smile crossed Jackson's face. Let's just say I've got my reasons. Together they approached the burning main house from the side least consumed by flames. The heat was intense, but Eleanor had no choice. If there was anything left that might help her understand what was happening, any clue to finding Hannah, she had to retrieve it now. There, she pointed to a section of the house that hadn't yet caught fire. My bedroom. Robert kept a chest under the floorboards. They moved quickly, Eleanor leading the way. Inside, the smoke was blinding the heat like a physical wall. Eleanor dropped to her hands and knees, crawling toward where she knew the loose floorboard to be. Her fingers found the edge, pried it up. The small metal chest was still there. Eleanor grabbed it just as a section of the ceiling gave way behind them. Jackson pulled her back, shielding her with his body as burning debris rained down. Go, he shouted over the roar of the flames. They stumbled out into the night air, coughing and gasping. Eleanor clutched the chest to her body like a lifeline. Once at a safe distance, she set it down and examined the lock. It would require a key she didn't have. Without hesitation, she picked up a rock and smashed it against the lock until the mechanism broke. Inside lay a stack of letters tied with faded ribbon, a small leather-bound journal, and a folded map that looked to have been torn from a military atlas. Eleanor rifled through the contents, stopping when she came to a letter addressed simply, "For Eleanor if the worst should happen." She broke the seal with trembling fingers and read by the light of her burning home. My dearest Ellie, if you are reading this, I have fallen in battle, though not perhaps in the manner officially reported. What I discovered in the final days of the war is too dangerous to commit fully to paper, but know this, the gold shipment reported stolen was not taken by Confederate raiders, but by men in our own ranks. I have evidence hidden where only you might find it, guided by the cipher we developed during our courtship. Remember the game we played with the first letters of paragraphs? Apply it to my journal entries from April 1865. Trust no one from my former regiment, especially those who rise to positions of power after the war. They will stop at nothing to recover what was taken and hide their crimes. All my love until we meet again. Robert. Eleanor's hands shook as she set the letter down. The cipher, of course. During the long nights at the field hospital, she and Robert had developed a simple code to pass messages under the watchful eyes of their superiors. The first letter of each paragraph in his journal entries would spell out a message. What is it? Jackson asked, watching her closely. Eleanor folded the letter and tucked it into her pocket along with the journal. A message from my husband, and possibly a way to find Hannah. Jackson nodded toward the burning buildings. We should go. If any of the gang returned to check their handiwork. I need supplies first, Eleanor said. The storage cellar might have survived. It's built into the hillside away from the main structures. The cellar had indeed escaped the fire. Eleanor moved with efficient purpose, gathering what they would need: ammunition for her husband's rifle and pistol, medical supplies, dried food, canteens of water, and a change of clothes. You're coming with me, she told Jackson. It wasn't a question. Wouldn't miss it, he replied, though his complexion had grown alarmingly pale. First, I need to properly dress that wound, Eleanor said. You're no good to me dead. As she rebandaged Jackson's shoulder by lantern light, Eleanor's mind worked through what she knew. Robert had discovered something during the war, something about stolen gold and corrupt officers, something worth killing for even 5 years later. And somehow Hannah had become caught in the middle of it. We'll leave at first light, Eleanor decided. Head to Redemption. It's the closest town and I need to speak with the sheriff. Redemption, Jackson repeated, a strange note in his voice. That's the judge's town. Eleanor's hand stilled. All the more reason to start there. By dawn, the stagecoach stop, known as Last Water, was nothing but smoldering ruins. Eleanor stood before it, committing the scene to memory. Every charred beam, every wisp of smoke rising against the pink morning sky, she would remember it all. Remember and repay. Ready? Jackson asked, already mounted on one of the 2 horses Eleanor had managed to save from the stable. Eleanor took one last look at the grave she dug for Wilkins, marked by a simple wooden cross. Then she swung herself into the saddle, the weight of her husband's rifle comforting against her back. "Ready," she answered, turning her horse toward the east, where the town of Redemption lay nestled in a valley between harsh, unforgiving mountains. Redemption had grown since Eleanor's last visit. New buildings lined the main street, and the sounds of construction echoed from the far end of town, where a new rail depot was taking shape. Progress had come to this corner of the territory, bringing with it all the trappings of civilization and all its corruptions. Eleanor and Jackson rode slowly down the main street, drawing curious glances. Her soot-stained clothes and determined expression, coupled with Jackson's obvious injury, made them a noteworthy pair. "Sheriff's office." Eleanor nodded toward a small building with a wooden star hanging outside. "Wait here." Jackson grabbed her reins before she could dismount. "Remember what I told you. The law in this town answers to the judge." Eleanor pulled her horse free from his grasp. "I don't have the luxury of suspicion. Hannah doesn't have time." Inside the sheriff's office, a young deputy sat with his boots propped on the desk, reading a tattered dime novel. He scrambled to his feet when Eleanor entered. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "can I help you?" "I need to see Sheriff Taylor," Eleanor said. "My name is Eleanor Hargrove. Last night, my stagecoach stop was burned to the ground, my employee murdered, and my daughter kidnapped by the Rattlesnake Gang." The deputy's eyes widened. "Lastwater. That's your place." Eleanor nodded grimly. "Sheriff's not here, ma'am. He's out with a posse tracking horse thieves up near Peterson's Ridge." The deputy fidgeted nervously. "But Judge Caldwell is in town. He's the law when Sheriff's away." A chill ran down Eleanor's spine. "Where can I find the judge?" "Courthouse, most likely, or the Grand Hotel. He takes his meals there." Eleanor thanked him and stepped back into the harsh sunlight. Jackson raised an eyebrow questioningly. "Sheriff's out of town," she said. "The deputy suggested I speak with Judge Caldwell." A muscle twitched in Jackson's jaw. "Convenient." "We're going to the courthouse," Eleanor decided. "I need to know if you're telling the truth about the judge." The county courthouse stood at the center of town, a two-story brick building that seemed to lord over the wooden structures surrounding it, a symbol of permanence in a place where everything else was transitory, just like the symbol on the paper Wilkins had given her. Eleanor tied her horse at the hitching post and turned to Jackson. "Stay with the horses. If I'm not back in 20 minutes, assume something's gone wrong." "And then what?" Jackson asked. "Then find Hannah," Eleanor said. "Without me, if necessary." The interior of the courthouse was cool and quiet, the thick walls insulating it from the bustling street outside. A clerk directed Eleanor to the judge's chambers on the second floor. She climbed the stairs slowly, her hand resting on the pistol concealed beneath her coat. If Jackson was right, if Judge Caldwell was indeed behind the attack on Lastwater, then she was walking into the lion's den. But she needed to see for herself, needed to look into the eyes of the man who had eulogized her husband as a hero and determine whether he was capable of orchestrating the destruction of her life. The door to the judge's chamber stood partially open. Eleanor could hear voices inside, one she recognized as Caldwell's distinctive baritone, the other unfamiliar. "Don't care how you do it," Caldwell was saying. "Find whatever the colonel hid and bring it to me, and make sure the woman doesn't survive to tell tales." Eleanor froze her breath, catching in her throat. "What about the girl?" the other voice asked. "Once you have what we need, she becomes a liability. Use your judgment." Eleanor's hand tightened around the grip of her pistol. She wanted nothing more than to burst through that door and put a bullet between Augustus Caldwell's eyes. But that wouldn't save Hannah. She needed to be smarter than that. Silently, she backed away from the door and retraced her steps downstairs. Outside, Jackson straightened when he saw her face. "You heard something," he said. Eleanor nodded, her expression grim. "We're leaving, now." They rode out of town at a measured pace, not wanting to draw attention. Only when Redemption had disappeared behind them did Eleanor pull her horse to a stop. "You were right about Caldwell," she said. "I heard him giving orders. They're going to kill Hannah once they find whatever they're looking for." Jackson's face showed no surprise, only a weary confirmation. "We need to reach Rattlesnake Canyon before they realize you've been to town. They'll be expecting you to seek help from the law." "First, I need answers," Eleanor said. "You know more than you're telling me. About Robert, about Caldwell, about this supposed treasure. I want the truth, or I swear I'll put a bullet in you right here." Jackson met her gaze steadily. Your husband discovered something during the last days of the war. Something that could destroy men like Caldwell. That's all I know for certain. And how do you know even that much? A shadow passed over Jackson's face. Because Robert Hargrove was my brother. The admission hit Eleanor like a physical blow. That's impossible. Robert had no family. He was raised in an orphanage in Boston. Half-brother, Jackson clarified. Same father, different mothers. He never knew about me. I found out about him after the war when I was trying to track down our father. Eleanor studied his face, looking for any resemblance to her late husband. The eyes, perhaps that same piercing blue. But everything else about him was different from Robert's solid, respectable appearance. Why should I believe you? You shouldn't, Jackson said simply. But it's the truth, and right now truth is in short supply. Eleanor turned away, her mind racing. If Jackson was Robert's brother, that would explain his interest in whatever Robert had hidden. But it didn't explain why he'd joined the Rattlesnake Gang or why he was helping her now. If you're his brother, she said slowly, then why are you riding with the men who are trying to destroy what's left of his family? A bitter smile twisted Jackson's lips. Let's just say I have my own score to settle with Judge Caldwell and his kind. The gang was a means to an end. And what end is that? Same as yours, I expect, Jackson said. Justice. Eleanor wasn't sure she believed him, but right now she had no choice but to accept his help. We need supplies, she decided, and information about Rattlesnake Canyon. There's a trading post about 5 miles from here. Old Man Wallace might know something. They rode in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Eleanor's mind kept returning to the letter from Robert, to the cipher he mentioned. She needed time to study his journal to decode whatever message he had left for her. But time was the one thing Hannah didn't have. Wallace's trading post was little more than a ramshackle building perched on the edge of a dry riverbed. A handful of horses stood in the corral, and smoke rose from the stone chimney despite the heat of the day. Inside the trading post was dim and cluttered with merchandise ranging from tools and weapons to clothing and preserved foods. Behind the counter stood Wallace himself, a grizzled old frontiersman with a magnificent white beard and eyes nearly lost in a sea of wrinkles. Mrs. Hargrove, he greeted, her recognition dawning on his weathered face. Heard about your trouble. News travels fast out here. Then you know I'm in a hurry, Eleanor said. I need ammunition supplies and information about Rattlesnake Canyon. Wallace's bushy eyebrows rose at the mention of the canyon. Nasty place. Apaches say it's cursed. White folks stay clear because of the rattlers. No one goes there except outlaws and fools. The Rattlesnake Gang is holding my daughter there, Eleanor said. I need to know the best way in. Wallace stroked his beard thoughtfully. There's only one trail wide enough for horses. Follows the old riverbed up into the canyon. But they'll have it watched. Is there another way? Jackson asked from the doorway where he stood keeping watch. Wallace squinted at him suspiciously before answering. There's a game trail that branches off about 2 miles before the main entrance. Steep climb, but it'll take you to the rim of the canyon. From there, you might find a way down inside. Eleanor nodded. We'll need food, water, ammunition for a Winchester rifle and a Navy Colt and whatever medical supplies you can spare. As Wallace gathered the requested items, the door opened again. A man entered, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing the dust of long travel on his clothes. His eyes scanned the room before settling on Eleanor. Mrs. Hargrove, he inquired, his voice cultured despite his rough appearance. Eleanor's hand moved toward her concealed pistol. Who's asking? The man removed his hat, revealing close-cropped, dark hair streaked with gray at the temples. Gabriel Stone, Pinkerton Detective Agency. I've been looking for you. Jackson tensed visibly, his own hand hovering near his sidearm. How did you know where to find me? Eleanor demanded. I've been tracking the Rattlesnake Gang for 3 months, Stone explained. When I heard about the attack on Lastwater, I guessed you might come this way. He glanced at Jackson, though I'm surprised by your choice of traveling companion. Wallace set the last of Eleanor's supplies on the counter, his eyes darting nervously between the 3 figures in his store. That'll be $12, even Mrs. Hargrove, he said, clearly eager to conclude their business. Eleanor placed the money on the counter without taking her eyes off Stone. What's your interest in the rattlesnakes? Was Mr. Stone? Not the gang itself, Stone replied. What they're looking for, the missing Union gold shipment from 65. A chill ran down Eleanor's spine. So it was about gold after all. I don't know anything about any gold, she said carefully. Stone's expression remained neutral. Perhaps not, but your husband did. Colonel Robert Hargrove was the last person to see that shipment before it disappeared. $500,000 in gold coins meant to pay the Union Army, gone without a trace. Robert was cleared of any wrongdoing. Eleanor said, her voice tight. Officially, yes. Stone's eyes never left hers. But questions remained. Questions that powerful men would prefer stayed buried. Men like Judge Augustus Caldwell. Eleanor gathered her supplies, weighing her options. Stone knew something, perhaps enough to help her find Hannah. But trusting him meant another unknown variable in an already dangerous equation. Mr. Stone, she said finally, my only concern right now is finding my daughter. If you have information that can help me do that, I'm willing to listen. Otherwise, you're wasting time I don't have. Stone nodded as if he'd expected nothing less. I can help you, Mrs. Hargrove. I know the canyon. I know where the gang makes camp. And I know that your daughter is still alive. At least she was when I left to find you. You've seen her, Eleanor's heart leaped. Yesterday evening, they're keeping her in an abandoned mining office near the center of the canyon. She's guarded but unharmed for now. Jackson stepped forward. And why would a Pinkerton agent be skulking around Rattlesnake Canyon instead of bringing in the law? Stone's gaze shifted to Jackson, cold and assessing. Because this investigation goes beyond simple outlaws, Mr. Jackson, he supplied, offering nothing more. Mr. Jackson. Stone nodded. This case involves military corruption at the highest levels, the kind of corruption that can buy judges, sheriffs, and territorial governors. The kind that disappears, witnesses, and burns down the stagecoach, stops to hide the evidence. Eleanor exchanged a glance with Jackson. Stone's words aligned with what they already suspected about Caldwell's involvement. If you want to save your daughter, Stone continued, and possibly clear your husband's name in the process, I suggest we work together. Eleanor considered her options. She didn't trust Stone, couldn't afford to trust anyone fully right now, but his knowledge of the canyon and the gang's hideout could prove invaluable. We leave in 10 minutes, she decided. You can tell me what you know on the way. The sun hung low in the western sky by the time they reached the approach to Rattlesnake Canyon. Eleanor had spent the journey questioning Stone about everything he knew while simultaneously studying Robert's journal whenever they stopped to rest. The cipher was as she remembered the first letter of each paragraph, spelling out a message. But Robert had added a complexity alternating between the first and last letters depending on whether the paragraph number was odd or even. It was slow work, but she had already deciphered enough to understand that whatever Robert had hidden, it wasn't gold. It was evidence of a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of the Union Army command structure in the final days of the war. There, Stone pointed to a narrow trail branching off from the main path. That's the game trail Wallace mentioned. It's steep but passable if we lead the horses. Eleanor dismounted, wincing at the stiffness in her legs. 24 hours had passed since the attack on Lastwater. 24 hours since Hannah had been taken. The need to find her daughter clawed at Eleanor's insides like a living thing. How many men does the gang have in the canyon? She asked Stone as they began the ascent. I counted 12, Stone replied, including their leader man, they call Preacher, former Army chaplain turned outlaw after the war. Mean as they come, but he runs a tight operation. And my daughter, Eleanor pressed. You're certain she's unharmed? Stone's expression softened slightly. She has your spirit, Mrs. Hargrove. I heard her cursing out her guards in terms that would make a cavalry sergeant blush. Despite everything, Eleanor felt a flicker of pride. Hannah had always been strong-willed, even as a child. Robert used to say she'd inherited all of Eleanor's fire with none of her patience. The trail grew steeper, forcing them to focus on their footing. Jackson, still weak from his wounds, struggled visibly with the climb. Eleanor noticed Stone watching him with thinly veiled suspicion. Your friend isn't going to make it much further, Stone observed quietly. That wound needs proper attention. He'll make it, Eleanor said with more confidence than she felt. And he's not my friend, he's insurance. Stone raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. As they neared the rim of the canyon, a sound from above made them freeze. Voices drifted down from the rocks ahead, two men speaking in low tones. Lookouts, Stone mouthed, drawing his pistol. Eleanor signaled for Jackson to secure the horses while she and Stone crept forward. Through the gathering dusk, she could make out two figures perched on an outcropping about 30 yards ahead. They were smoking their rifles, resting carelessly against the rocks beside them. Stone raised his pistol, but Eleanor placed a restraining hand on his arm. She shook her head and pointed to herself, then to her rifle. Understanding dawned in Stone's eyes. He nodded and melted back into the shadows. Eleanor unslung the Winchester from her back and settled into a shooting position behind a boulder. The rifle had been Robert's used during his time scouting for the Union Army. Its weight was familiar in her hands, a connection to the man she had lost. Through the rifle's sight, she could see the lookouts clearly now. Young men, barely more than boys. One of them laughed at something the other said, his head tilting back to exhale smoke toward the darkening sky. Eleanor's finger tightened on the trigger, then hesitated. These men had helped burn her home, had taken her daughter, had killed Wilkins. They deserved no mercy. And yet, "Do it," Jackson's voice came softly from behind her. "Or I will." Eleanor drew a steadying breath and adjusted her aim. Not for the head or chest, but lower the right shoulder of the first man, the left leg of the second. Wounds that would incapacitate without killing. Two shots rang out in quick succession, echoing off the canyon walls. Both lookouts went down once, one clutching his shoulder, the other grabbing at his thigh. Eleanor was moving before the echoes died away, Jackson and Stone close behind her. They reached the wounded men in seconds. "Where's my daughter?" Eleanor demanded, pressing the still hot barrel of the rifle against the chest of the man she'd shot in the shoulder. The lookout's eyes widened with pain and fear. Down in the canyon, old mining office, please. I'm bleeding bad." "You'll live," Eleanor said coldly. She turned to Stone. "Tie them up. Make sure they can't raise an alarm, but don't let them bleed out either." While Stone secured the prisoners, Eleanor knelt beside the second man, the one she'd shot in the leg. The bullet had passed clean through the meat of his thigh, missing the major artery. He'd survive, but he wouldn't be walking anytime soon. "The girl," she said, "is she still alive?" The young outlaw nodded frantically. "Yes, ma'am. Preacher's orders, not to be harmed until they find whatever they're looking for." "And what is that exactly?" The man hesitated. Eleanor pressed her thumb directly into his wound. He gasped in pain. "Some kind of map," he blurted, "or documents. Something the colonel hid before he died. Something about the gold." Eleanor removed her thumb. "Who's giving the orders, Preacher or someone else?" "Preacher takes his orders from the judge," the man admitted. "But there's another man came yesterday, city man, with fancy clothes and a watch chain. He's the one asking all the questions about the colonel and the gold." Eleanor exchanged a glance with Stone, a new player in the game, someone they hadn't anticipated. Once both lookouts were securely bound and gagged, the three of them moved to the edge of the canyon rim. Below, in the gathering darkness, they could see the flickering lights of campfires scattered across the canyon floor. At the center, a larger structure stood, presumably the abandoned mining office where Hannah was being held. "There's too many of them for a direct approach," Stone observed. "We need a diversion." Eleanor studied the layout, her mind working through the problem methodically. Those buildings to the north, storage sheds for the mine, most likely. If they caught fire, it would draw most of the men away from the main building, Jackson finished for her. "Good thinking." "I'll set the fire," Stone volunteered. "You two work your way down to the mining office. Wait for the distraction before making your move." Eleanor nodded. It was a solid plan, simple but with a decent chance of success. As Stone moved away to begin his descent down the northern face of the canyon, Jackson touched Eleanor's arm. "You should know," he said quietly, "I don't trust him." "I don't trust anyone," Eleanor replied. "But right now, he's useful." They found a narrow trail leading down the canyon wall, little more than a game path used by mountain goats, but navigable if taken slowly. The darkness worked in their favor, concealing their descent from the men below. Halfway down, Eleanor paused to catch her breath and check on Jackson's condition. His face was pale in the moonlight, his shirt dark with fresh blood. "You're bleeding again," she observed. Jackson shrugged his good shoulder. "Had worse." "Let me see." Eleanor didn't wait for permission, pulling aside his coat to examine the wound. The stitches had torn, but the bleeding wasn't severe. She applied a fresh bandage from her supplies, working quickly and efficiently. "Why did you shoot to wound back there?" Jackson asked suddenly. They wouldn't have shown you the same mercy. Eleanor's hands stilled for a moment before resuming their work. I've seen enough death to last several lifetimes, Mr. Jackson. I won't take a life unless there's no other choice. Even to save your daughter. To save Hannah, I'll do whatever is necessary, Eleanor replied, her voice hardening, but I won't become the monster Caldwell is in the process. They continued their descent in silence, reaching the canyon floor just as the moon rose fully above the rim. From their position behind a cluster of boulders, they had a clear view of the mining office. Two men stood guard outside the main entrance, rifles at the ready. Now we wait for Stone's distraction, Eleanor whispered. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Eleanor found her mind wandering to Hannah, picturing her daughter's face, hearing her laughter. Hannah, who had been just 12 when Robert died, who had helped Eleanor build Lastwater from nothing into a thriving stagecoach, stop, who had never complained about the isolation or the hard work finding joy in the small moments of beauty the harsh frontier offered. Eleanor's reverie was broken by a sudden shout from the northern end of the canyon. A moment later, flames leaped skyward as one of the storage sheds caught fire. The effect was immediate. Men poured out of the surrounding tents and structures, running toward the blaze. The two guards at the mining office hesitated, looking to each other for direction. You stay, I'll check it out, one finally said to the other before jogging toward the commotion. Eleanor nodded to Jackson, one guard they could handle. They circled around and behind the mining office, searching for a rear entrance. They found a small window, its glass long since broken out. Through it, Eleanor could see a dimly lit room with wooden support beams and the remnants of old mining equipment. And there, seated on a chair in the center of the room, her hands bound behind her back, was Hannah. Eleanor's heart leaped at the sight of her daughter alive, apparently unharmed. She was about to call out when the door to the room opened and a tall figure entered. The man wore a long black coat despite the heat, and a wide-brimmed preacher's hat cast his face in shadow. When he spoke, his voice carried the cadence of a sermon, though the words were anything but godly. Your mother's time is running out, Miss Hargrove, he said. If she doesn't appear by dawn with what we're looking for, my orders are quite specific. Hannah's chin lifted defiantly. My mother will come, and when she does, she'll put a bullet between your eyes, preacher. The man called preacher laughed, a sound devoid of any genuine mirth. Such faith! I remember having faith once, before the war. Before I saw what men are truly capable of. He leaned closer to Hannah. Your father knew. He saw the same things I did. The difference is he tried to do something about it. Eleanor felt Jackson tense beside her. Before she could stop him, he had drawn his pistol and was taking aim through the window at Preacher's back. No, she hissed, grabbing his wrist. You'll hit Hannah. Jackson's eyes burned with an intensity that startled her. I won't miss. We stick to the plan, Eleanor insisted. Wait for the guard to investigate the fire, then we move. As if on cue, a shout came from the front of the building. Preacher, the storehouse is burning. They need everyone to form a bucket line. Preacher straightened, adjusting his hat. Duty calls, Miss Hargrove. Consider what I've said. Your mother's life depends on your cooperation. He strode from the room, closing the door behind him. Eleanor heard the distinct sound of a key turning in the lock. Now, she whispered to Jackson. Eleanor boosted herself through the window, first landing softly on the wooden floor inside. Hannah's head snapped up, her eyes widening with recognition and relief. Mama, she breathed. Eleanor rushed to her daughter's side, quickly untying the ropes that bound her wrists. Are you hurt? Hannah shook her head, her eyes welling with tears. I knew you'd come. I told them you would. Of course I came. Eleanor pulled her daughter into a fierce embrace. I will always come for you. Jackson dropped through the window behind them. Touching reunion, but we need to move. That fire won't distract them forever. Hannah pulled back from her mother's embrace, noticing Jackson for the first time. Who's he? Oh, a temporary ally, Eleanor said, helping Hannah to her feet. Can you walk? Hannah nodded, rubbing her wrists where the ropes had chafed the skin raw. They haven't fed me much, but I'm okay. Good girl, Eleanor turned to Jackson. We go out the way we came in. The guard at the front will be watching the fire, not the rear of the building. Jackson peered out the window cautiously. Stone should be making his way back to us by now if he survives setting the fire. If he didn't, we proceed without him, Eleanor said firmly. Hannah is all that matters now. They were about to climb back through the window when the sound of a key in the lock froze them in place. The door swung open, revealing not Preacher, but a different man entirely. He was older, distinguished-looking, with silver at his temples and a neatly trimmed beard. His clothes were those of a successful businessman or politician, not an outlaw. And Eleanor recognized him immediately. Judge Augustus Caldwell stood in the doorway, a pistol in his hand, his expression a mixture of surprise and cold calculation as he took in the scene before him. "Mrs. Hargrove," he said, his voice as measured and reasonable as it had been at Robert's funeral. "I see you've saved us the trouble of looking for you." Eleanor pushed Hannah behind her, shielding her daughter with her body. "It's over, Augustus. Let us go, and perhaps you can still salvage something of your reputation." Caldwell's smile never reached his eyes. "My dear Eleanor, it's far too late for that." He raised his pistol and fired. The gunshot echoed in the confined space of the mining office. Eleanor felt the heat of the bullet as it passed within inches of her face, striking the wooden beam behind her. Not to miss a warning. "Next one won't be so charitable," Caldwell said, his aim unwavering. "Step away from the girl." Jackson moved with unexpected speed, positioning himself between Eleanor and the judge's pistol. "You'll have to go through me first, Caldwell." Recognition flickered in the judge's eyes. "Jackson Hargrove. I should have known you'd crawl out from whatever rock you've been hiding under." His gaze shifted between Jackson and Eleanor. "I see the family resemblance has finally revealed itself." Hannah looked from Jackson to her mother, confusion written across her face. "Mama." Later, Eleanor whispered, her mind racing for a way out of this trap. The fire still blazed at the north end of the canyon, but it wouldn't distract the Rattlesnake Gang forever. Once they realized their prisoner was being rescued, they would return in force. "What did Robert hide, Eleanor?" Caldwell asked, his tone almost conversational. "The gold documents, both." "I don't know what you're talking about," Eleanor replied, trying to buy time. Her hand inched toward the knife concealed at her waist. A cold smile played at the corners of Caldwell's mouth. "I think you do. Robert would have told you something, left you some clue. He was always so meticulous." Outside shouts indicated the fire was being brought under control. Their window of opportunity was closing rapidly. "You were his friend," Eleanor said, her voice tight with controlled rage. "You spoke at his funeral, called him a hero." "He was a hero," Caldwell acknowledged, "until he became a liability." He gestured with his pistol. "Now all of you against the wall." The moment stretched taut as a bowstring. Then from somewhere outside came the sound of a gunshot, followed by a cry of pain. Caldwell's head turned reflexively toward the noise. It was all the distraction they needed. Jackson lunged forward, driving his shoulder into Caldwell's midsection. The judge's pistol discharged again, the bullet splintering wood above their heads. They crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs, struggling for control of the weapon. "Go!" Jackson shouted to Eleanor. "Get her out of here!" Eleanor grabbed Hannah's arm and pulled her toward the window. "Climb through, now!" Hannah hesitated, her eyes on the fighting men. "But now, Hannah," the authority in Eleanor's voice brooked no argument. Hannah scrambled through the window, Eleanor right behind her. Outside, chaos had erupted. The storage shed fire had spread to a second building, and men ran in all directions, some fighting the blaze, others responding to the commotion at the mining office. Through the smoke and confusion, Eleanor spotted a familiar figure crouched behind a water trough about 20 yards away. Gabriel Stone beckoned urgently to them. "This way," he called. Eleanor pushed Hannah ahead of her, both of them staying low as they ran toward Stone's position. A bullet kicked up dirt at Eleanor's heels, but she didn't look back. Reaching the trough, they dropped down beside Stone. "Where's Jackson?" he asked, firing a covering shot toward a group of outlaws approaching from the burning buildings. "Still inside with Caldwell," Eleanor replied, checking her pistol. "We need to get Hannah out of the canyon." Stone nodded grimly. "The horses are hidden in a ravine east of here. If we can reach them, we might make it to the rim before they cut us off." "Off?" Hannah clutched Eleanor's arm. "We can't leave him, Mama. He saved us." Eleanor hesitated, torn between her daughter's safety and the debt she owed Jackson. Before she could decide, the mining office door burst open. Jackson staggered out, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead, Caldwell's pistol in his hand. "He got away," Jackson called to them, firing at the approaching outlaws to cover his retreat. "Out the back," Stone swore under his breath. "If Caldwell raises the alarm, we'll have the entire gang on our trail." "Then we don't give him time," Eleanor decided. Jackson, to us. Jackson sprinted toward their position, zigzagging to avoid the bullets striking the ground around him. Eleanor and Stone provided covering fire, forcing the outlaws to seek shelter. When Jackson reached them, he was breathing hard, his face pale beneath the blood and grime. East Ravine, Stone instructed. On my signal, we move together. Ready? Now. They broke cover simultaneously, running in a tight group toward the eastern edge of the canyon. Eleanor kept Hannah between herself and the men, shielding her daughter with her body. Bullets whined past them, but the growing darkness and smoke from the fire worked in their favor, making them difficult targets. The ravine appeared ahead, a narrow cut in the canyon wall that led upward toward the rim. Stone reached it first, helping Hannah scramble up the steep incline. Eleanor followed, with Jackson bringing up the rear, pausing occasionally to fire at their pursuers. The horses should be just ahead, Stone panted as they climbed, tied in a grove of junipers. The going was difficult, the ravine steeper and more treacherous than it had appeared from below. Hannah slipped once, cutting her palm on a sharp rock, but she pushed on without complaint. Eleanor felt a surge of fierce pride for her daughter's courage. They reached the horses just as the moon emerged from behind a cloud, bathing the landscape in silver light. Stone quickly untied the animals, while Eleanor checked Hannah's injured hand. It's not deep, she assured her daughter, wrapping a strip of cloth around the cut. It will heal clean. Hannah nodded, her eyes moving to Jackson, who had slumped against a boulder, his breathing labored. He needs help too. Eleanor approached Jackson, noting the fresh blood staining his shirt and the unnatural pallor of his skin. The wound in his shoulder had reopened again, and the gash on his forehead was still bleeding freely. You need stitches, she said, reaching for her medical supplies. Jackson waved her off. No time. We need to keep moving. You won't make it far like this, Eleanor insisted. Let me at least stop the bleeding. While Stone kept watch, Eleanor worked quickly to rebandage Jackson's shoulder and clean the head wound. As she worked, Hannah approached, carrying a canteen of water. You're my uncle, she asked Jackson directly. My father's brother. Jackson's pale eyes, so like Robert's, found Hannah's face. Half-brother, he corrected, though he never knew about me. Why are you helping us? A ghost of a smile touched Jackson's lips. Family. Even the kind you never knew you had. Eleanor finished securing the bandage around Jackson's head. That's the best I can do for now. Once we're safely away, I'll take a proper look at that shoulder. Stone appeared beside them, leading the horses. We need to move. They've organized a search party. I can hear them coming up the ravine. They mounted quickly, Hannah riding double with Eleanor, Jackson on his own horse despite his weakened condition. Stone led them away from the ravine, following a faint trail that wound along the canyon rim. Where are we going? Eleanor asked as they rode. There's a place about 10 miles north of here, Stone answered. Old Apache trading post. Man named Two Rivers runs it. We can rest there, regroup. Eleanor exchanged a glance with Jackson. Can he be trusted? Two Rivers owes me a debt, Stone said simply. He'll help us. They rode through the night, pushing the horses as hard as they dared over the rough terrain. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit gradually faded, but Eleanor took no comfort in the silence. Caldwell would not give up so easily, not when he believed she knew the location of whatever Robert had hidden. Hannah eventually dozed against Eleanor's back, exhaustion claiming her despite the uncomfortable ride. Eleanor kept one arm wrapped protectively around her daughter, her mind working through everything that had happened. Robert's letter, the cipher in his journal, Caldwell's involvement, the missing gold. The pieces were there, but they didn't quite fit together yet. What had Robert discovered that was worth killing? For even 5 years after his death, dawn was breaking by the time they reached the trading post, a collection of low adobe buildings nestled in a small valley. Smoke rose from a stone chimney, suggesting someone was awake despite the early hour. Stone dismounted first, approaching the main building cautiously. The door opened before he reached it, revealing an elderly Native American man wearing a mixture of traditional dress and white man's clothing. His face was deeply lined, his long hair streaked with gray, but he stood straight and proud. Gabriel Stone, the man greeted him, his voice betraying no surprise. The spirits told me you would come. Stone inclined his head respectfully. Two Rivers, we need shelter and rest. We're being hunted. Two Rivers' dark eyes moved past Stone to take in Eleanor, Hannah, and the wounded Jackson. The judge's men? Yes. Then you will find sanctuary here. Two Rivers stepped aside, gesturing for them to enter. Come, There is food and water and a place to tend your wounded. Inside the trading post was surprisingly spacious, the main room dominated by a large fireplace, where a pot of something aromatic simmered. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with goods ranging from practical necessities to handcrafted items of remarkable beauty. Two Rivers led them to a back room where pallets had been laid out on the floor. Rest here, you will be safe for a time. Eleanor helped Jackson to one of the pallets, then turned to their host. I need hot water, clean cloth, and a needle and thread to tend his wounds. Two Rivers nodded. I will bring what you need. Once he had gone, Hannah sank onto one of the pallets, fatigue evident in every line of her body. Are we safe here, Mama? Eleanor knelt beside her daughter, brushing a strand of hair from her face. For now, rest. I'll wake you when there's food. Hannah caught her mother's hand. I heard things while they held me. About father, about the gold. They said he stole it. Your father stole nothing, Eleanor said firmly. Whatever they told you were lies. Then what did he hide? Why are they looking for it? Eleanor sighed, weighing how much to tell her daughter. I'm not sure yet, but I intend to find out. As Hannah drifted into an exhausted sleep, Two Rivers returned with the supplies Eleanor had requested. He watched silently as she cut away Jackson's shirt to reveal the full extent of his wound. The bullet wound is infected, Two Rivers observed. He has fever. Eleanor nodded grimly. The skin around the entry wound was angry and hot to the touch. I need to drain it, clean it properly. I have herbs that will help, Two Rivers offered. They draw out poison and cool the blood. Bring them, Eleanor agreed, knowing that frontier medicine often benefited from native wisdom. While Two Rivers prepared his herbal remedy, Eleanor worked methodically to clean Jackson's wound. He drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally muttering names and fragments of phrases that made little sense. Stone stood by the doorway, keeping watch while also observing Eleanor's work. Where did you learn to do that? He asked eventually. I was a nurse during the war, Eleanor replied without looking up. Field hospital at Gettysburg, then later with Grant's army during the Virginia campaign. That's how you met the colonel. Eleanor's hand stilled momentarily. Yes, he was wounded at Cold Harbor. I helped save his leg when the surgeons wanted to amputate. And afterward, when he was investigating the missing gold shipment, Eleanor's gaze snapped up to meet Stone's. Is that why you're really here, Mr. Stone? Stone held her gaze steadily. I'm here because 5 years ago, a good man tried to expose corruption in the Union Army and was killed for it. Your husband. The Pinkerton Agency suddenly developed a conscience about military corruption. A slight smile touched Stone's lips. Not the agency. Me. I served under your husband briefly before he was killed. He was a good officer, cared about his men. Eleanor turned back to her patient, her expression thoughtful. Robert never mentioned you. I was just one of many, but I remember him, and I remember the rumors after his death, that he discovered something about the missing gold shipment, something that implicated high-ranking officers. Like Judge Caldwell. Among others, Stone confirmed, men who went on to positions of considerable power after the war. Two Rivers returned with a poultice of crushed herbs. This will draw out the poison, he explained, showing Eleanor how to apply it to Jackson's wound. As they worked together, Eleanor studied the old man's face. You knew my husband, didn't you? That's why you're helping us. Two Rivers' expression revealed nothing. The colonel was a fair man in a time of few fair men. He prevented a massacre of my people when others would have welcomed it. A massacre? Eleanor looked up sharply. When was this? After Gettysburg, when the army moved west to secure the frontier territories. Two Rivers applied the last of the poultice and straightened. Your husband's regiment was ordered to clear our village from a valley rich with silver. He refused the order. And Caldwell? Stone asked. What was his role? He was the one who gave the order. Two Rivers said simply, when the colonel refused, Caldwell found others willing to do what he would not. Eleanor sat back on her heels, processing this new information. The missing gold shipment, it wasn't stolen by Confederate raiders, was it? No. Two Rivers confirmed. It was taken by Union officers to finance operations outside the Army's official command, operations like removing my people from valuable land. The pieces were beginning to fit together. Robert's letter had mentioned evidence hidden where only she might find it. Evidence of corruption of unofficial operations using diverted funds operations that men like Caldwell had every reason to keep hidden. Two Rivers, Eleanor said slowly. Do you know what my husband hid the evidence Caldwell is looking for? The old man's eyes held hers. I know only that before he died, the colonel came to me. He gave me something to keep safe until the right time. Eleanor's pulse quickened. What was it? Not what, me, who? Two Rivers' gaze moved to Jackson's unconscious form. His brother. A stunned silence followed this revelation. Eleanor looked from Two Rivers to Jackson, trying to make sense of what she just heard. Jackson came to you, she finally asked, when 5 summers ago, wounded like now, hunted by the same men who had killed his brother. Two Rivers moved to a small wooden chest in the corner of the room. From it, he withdrew a battered cavalry saber in a worn leather scabbard. The colonel left this as well. He said when the time came, it would show the way. Eleanor accepted the sword with trembling hands. It was standard Union Army issue, the kind carried by cavalry officers throughout the war. But as she examined it more closely, she noticed something unusual about the scabbard, faint markings etched into the leather, almost invisible, unless you knew to look for them. A map, she breathed, tracing the lines with her fingertip. Of a sort, Two Rivers agreed, though only part of one, I think. Stone leaned closer to examine the markings. Coordinates maybe, or landmarks. Eleanor turned the scabbard, studying it from different angles. It's a route, through the mountains west of here. She looked up at Two Rivers. This is what Caldwell is searching for. One piece of it, the old man corrected. The colonel said there were 3 parts to the map. The sword is only one. The journal, Eleanor realized. Robert's journal contains a cipher, a coded message. She reached into her coat, withdrawing the small, leather-bound book she'd recovered from the chest at last water. I've only deciphered part of it so far. Stone straightened his expression, turning alert. We should move on. If Caldwell knows about Two Rivers' connection to your husband, this will be one of the first places he searches. Too late, Two Rivers said, glancing toward the front of the building. They are already here. Eleanor moved to the small window that looked out on the trading post yard. 3 riders had appeared, their horses kicking up dust as they approached. One of them she recognized immediately from his long black coat and wide-brimmed hat. Preacher. How many ways out? Stone asked Two Rivers. Through the storage room, there is a tunnel, the old man replied. It leads to a ravine behind the trading post. Your horses are there. Eleanor hesitated, looking at Jackson's unconscious form. He's in no condition to ride. I will stay with him, Two Rivers offered. Buy you time to escape. No, Eleanor shook her head firmly. We go together or not at all. A pained laugh came from Jackson's palate. Always the stubborn one, just like Robert said. Eleanor turned to find Jackson awake, his eyes fever-bright but lucid. You heard enough. Jackson struggled to sit up, wincing with the effort. Two Rivers is right. I'll slow you down. Get Hannah out of here. I'm not leaving you to Caldwell, Eleanor insisted. You're the evidence, aren't you? The witness to whatever Robert discovered. Jackson's pale eyes met hers. Among other things. Outside voices called for Two Rivers to come out. The old man moved toward the front of the building, his posture straight and dignified. I will speak with them. Gather what you need and be ready to leave. Eleanor quickly collected her supplies, securing Robert's journal and the sword scabbard inside her coat. Stone gently woke Hannah, explaining in hushed tones that they needed to move quietly. Help me with him, Eleanor instructed Stone, nodding toward Jackson. Together, they got Jackson to his feet. He swayed dangerously but remained conscious, gritting his teeth against the pain. This way, Stone directed, leading them through a doorway into a storage room stacked with crates and bundles of furs. At the back, partially hidden behind a large trunk, a trapdoor led down into darkness. Stone descended first, then helped lower Jackson into the tunnel. Hannah followed with Eleanor, bringing up the rear after carefully closing the trapdoor behind them. The tunnel was low and narrow, forcing them to move in a hunched position. A faint light glowed ahead where the passage opened into daylight. They had covered perhaps half the distance when a gunshot echoed from the trading post above them, followed by a second. Eleanor froze, her heart seizing. Two Rivers. Keep moving, Stone urged. There's nothing we can do for him now. They emerged from the tunnel into a small ravine where their horses waited, tethered to a gnarled juniper. The animals were saddled and ready with fresh supplies secured to each. Two Rivers prepared for this, Stone observed grimly. He knew they would come. Eleanor helped Jackson mount, then swung up behind Hannah on her own horse. "Which way?" Stone pointed west toward the distant mountains. "Away from Rattlesnake Canyon. If we can reach the high country, we might lose them in the forests." They rode hard, pushing the horses as much as they dared over the rough terrain. Behind them, shouts and the faint sound of gunfire suggested their pursuers had discovered the tunnel. Jackson rode slumped in his saddle, his condition deteriorating despite Eleanor's treatment. When they finally stopped to rest the horses at midday, he nearly fell when dismounting. Eleanor caught him alarmed at the heat radiating from his skin. "The fever's worse," she told Stone as they helped Jackson to the shade of a large boulder. "We need to stop somewhere I can treat him properly." Stone scanned the horizon, his expression grim. "There's a hunting cabin about 5 miles west of here. Trapper I know uses it during fur season. Should be empty this time of year." "Will it have what I need? Clean water, shelter?" "It's basic, but yes." Stone handed his canteen to Hannah. "It's our best option." Eleanor knelt beside Jackson, helping him drink. "Did you know," she asked quietly, "about Robert's message to the evidence he was gathering?" Jackson's fever-bright eyes found hers. "Not all of it. Only that he'd discovered something during the last days of the war, something about the gold shipment and where it really went." "And Caldwell was involved?" "Caldwell and others? High-ranking officers who saw an opportunity in the chaos of war's end." Jackson coughed, wincing at the pain it caused. "Robert found out they'd diverted the gold to fund unofficial operations against the native tribes in the territories. Operations that would secure land for their own interests. The massacre Two Rivers mentioned." Jackson nodded weakly, "the first of many planned. Robert tried to stop it through official channels, but the corruption went too high. So he began gathering evidence instead." "Which is what got him killed," Eleanor finished. "Yes." Jackson's voice had grown fainter. "He found me just before the end. Told me to find you if anything happened to him. Said you'd have the key to exposing everything." Eleanor thought of the journal in her coat, the cipher she had only partially decoded. "The map on the sword scabbard, what does it lead to?" "The gold," Jackson whispered, "or what's left of it. And documents records of every transaction, every order. Names, dates, everything needed to bring Caldwell and the others to justice." Stone approached, having secured the horses. "We should move. They'll be on our trail soon." Eleanor helped Jackson to his feet, supporting his weight against her side. "Just a few more miles," she assured him. "Then you can rest properly." The hunting cabin proved to be little more than a one-room structure built of rough-hewn logs, but it was solid and well hidden among a stand of pine trees. A small stream ran nearby, providing the clean water Eleanor desperately needed. While Stone secured the perimeter, Eleanor set to work. She built a fire in the stone hearth, boiled water, and prepared to properly clean and dress Jackson's wounds. Hannah helped, displaying a calmness under pressure that reminded Eleanor painfully of Robert. "The bullet needs to come out," Eleanor told Jackson as she examined his shoulder. "It's causing the infection." Jackson nodded grimly. "Do what you have to." Eleanor gave him a stick to bite down on, then proceeded with the grim business of extracting the bullet that had been left in his shoulder too long. Hannah held the lantern steady, her young face set in determined lines as she watched her mother work. The bullet had fragmented, making the extraction difficult and painful. Jackson lost consciousness halfway through the procedure, which was perhaps a mercy. When Eleanor finally removed the last piece of lead, she cleaned the wound thoroughly with boiled water and whiskey from Stone's supplies, then packed it with more of Two Rivers' herbal poultice before bandaging it tightly. "Will he live?" Stone asked from the doorway where he kept watch. "If the fever breaks by morning, he has a chance," Eleanor replied, washing blood from her hands in a basin of water. "If not," she left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was clear. Jackson's condition was critical, and they had no access to the medications a proper doctor might prescribe. Hannah had settled on a rough bench near the fire, Robert's journal open on her lap. "Mama, I think I understand the cipher." Eleanor moved to sit beside her daughter. "Show me." "Father taught me a game when I was little," Hannah explained, her finger tracing the lines of text. "We would write messages where the first letter of each line spelled a different word. This is similar, but more complex." Eleanor nodded, impressed. "The first letter of odd-numbered paragraphs, the last letter of even-numbered ones. And every seventh word is significant," Hannah added. "When you put those together with the letters, it forms map coordinates. Eleanor stared at her daughter in amazement. How did you figure that out? A sad smile touched Hannah's lips. Father and I used to do puzzles like this. He said I had a mind for patterns. Together they worked through the journal, decoding Robert's message one paragraph at a time. As the pattern emerged, Eleanor felt a growing sense of awe at her husband's foresight and at her daughter's brilliance in recognizing it. These coordinates, Stone observed, looking over their work. They match the region shown on the sword scabbard. Eleanor nodded. And there's more. Names, dates, details of meetings between Caldwell and other officers. It's all here, just as Jackson said. Enough to hang Caldwell several times over, Stone agreed grimly. Eleanor closed the journal, her expression thoughtful. But why hide the gold? Why not just take the evidence to the authorities? Because the authorities were part of the conspiracy. Jackson's weak voice came from the bed where he lay. The gold was insurance and leverage. They turned to find Jackson awake, his eyes clearer than they had been for hours. The fever seemed to have broken, at least temporarily. How are you feeling? Eleanor asked, moving to check his bandages. Like I've been trampled by a cavalry charge. Jackson managed a weak smile. But I'll live thanks to you. Eleanor examined his wound, relieved to find no fresh bleeding and less heat in the surrounding skin. The infection is responding to treatment. You need rest now. Jackson caught her wrist. There's no time for rest. Caldwell will find us eventually. We need to reach the gold and the documents before he does. You're in no condition to travel, Eleanor objected. Doesn't matter. I'm the only one who can find the final piece of the map. Stone moved closer, his interest piqued. What final piece? Robert split the map 3 ways, Jackson explained. The journal contains the coordinates for the general region. The sword scabbard shows the route through the mountains, but the exact location of the cave where everything is hidden, that's the 3rd piece. And you have it, Eleanor asked. Jackson shook his head weakly. Not have. The last piece of the map is a tattoo on my back. Stunned silence greeted this revelation. Then Stone laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. Your brother had a flair for the dramatic, didn't he? He had to ensure the map couldn't be completed without all 3 pieces coming together, Jackson replied. And he knew Caldwell would never suspect me. The black sheep half-brother Robert, never publicly acknowledged. Eleanor helped Jackson sit up and gently remove the bandages covering his back. There, between his shoulder blades, was an intricate tattoo that at first glance appeared to be merely decorative, a stylized compass rose surrounded by abstract patterns. But when viewed with knowledge of the other map pieces, Eleanor could see that it formed the final crucial details. Clever, she murmured. Even if someone saw it, they wouldn't recognize its significance without the other pieces. That was the idea, Jackson confirmed. Robert arranged for the tattoo just days before he was killed. Said if anything happened to him, I was to find you and show you this. Eleanor traced the lines of the tattoo with her fingertip, matching them mentally to the markings on the sword scabbard. Together they formed a complete map to a location deep in the western mountains. If we leave at first light, Stone calculated, we could reach the area indicated by the coordinates in 2 days, maybe less if we push hard. And if Caldwell and his men are following, Eleanor asked. Stone's expression hardened. Then we deal with them when the time comes. Hannah, who had been quietly observing, suddenly spoke up. There's something else in the journal. A warning. She opened the book to a page near the end and pointed to a passage. Eleanor read it aloud. If you are reading this, you have decoded my message and likely assembled the map. But beware, the evidence I have gathered implicates men beyond Caldwell. Men in Washington with connections to the highest levels of government. They will not allow this information to become public without a fight. Robert knew the risks, Jackson said softly. He died because of them. Eleanor closed the journal, her decision made. Then we finish what he started. We find the gold and the documents, and we bring Caldwell to justice. It won't be easy, Stone warned. Even with the evidence, men like Caldwell have powerful friends. I'm not looking for easy, Mr. Stone, Eleanor replied, her voice steel. I'm looking for justice, for Robert, for Two Rivers, for everyone who has died because of their greed. The cabin fell silent save for the crackling of the fire. Outside, night had fallen, fully cloaking the mountains in darkness. Somewhere out there, Caldwell and his men were hunting them, drawing ever closer. Eleanor moved to the cabin's single window, gazing out at the star-filled sky. 5 years she had lived with the shadow of suspicion hanging over Robert's name. 5 years of whispered rumors that her husband had been a thief, a traitor to his oath as an officer. Now finally she had the means to clear his name and to bring his killers to account. "We should rest while we can," she said finally. "Tomorrow will be challenging enough." Stone nodded, settling himself on the floor near the door, his rifle across his knees. "I'll take first watch." Eleanor made Hannah as comfortable as possible on a bedroll near the fire, then checked Jackson's condition once more. His fever had definitely broken, and though he was weak from blood loss and infection, his eyes were clear and alert. "Thank you," he said quietly as she adjusted his blankets, "for saving my life. Twice now." "Rest," Eleanor told him. "Save your strength for tomorrow." But as she turned to go, Jackson caught her hand. "There's something else you should know about Robert." Eleanor paused, noting the conflict in Jackson's expression. "What is it?" "The real reason Caldwell and the others had him killed," Jackson said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't just because he discovered their scheme with the gold. It was because of Hannah." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "What about Hannah?" Jackson glanced toward where the girl slept, then back to Eleanor. "She's not your daughter by birth, is she?" The question struck Eleanor like a physical blow. "How did you know that?" "Robert told me before the end. He said Hannah was special, that she needed to be protected at all costs." Eleanor sank down beside Jackson's bed, her legs suddenly unable to support her. "Hannah was 3 when Robert brought her to me during the war. He said she was the orphaned daughter of a Confederate officer who had saved his life before dying of his wounds. I agreed to raise her as our own." "That's not the whole story," Jackson said gently. "Hannah is Robert's daughter by blood, from a relationship before he met you." Eleanor stared at him, shock rendering her momentarily speechless. "That's not possible. Robert would have told me." "He couldn't," Jackson explained. "Hannah's mother was Comanche, the daughter of a chief whose lands contained the silver mines Caldwell and the others wanted. Robert's relationship with her was secret, forbidden by Army regulations." The revelation struck Eleanor with the force of a thunderbolt. She looked toward Hannah's sleeping form, seeing her now with new eyes. The girl had always resembled Robert, his coloring, his expressions, but Eleanor had attributed that to the bond between them, to Hannah, absorbing mannerisms from the man she called father. "When the miners discovered silver on Comanche land," Jackson continued, "Caldwell ordered Robert's regiment to clear the natives out. Robert refused, tried to negotiate a peaceful solution instead. During those negotiations, he discovered he had a daughter, Hannah. And her mother," Eleanor asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. "Killed in the massacre that followed once Caldwell brought in another regiment willing to carry out his orders." Jackson's voice was heavy with the weight of the past. "Robert managed to save Hannah, smuggled her out before the killing started. He brought her to you because he knew you would love her as your own." Eleanor's mind reeled with the implications. The gold, the documents, they're evidence of this massacre, of Caldwell's orders. Jackson nodded grimly. "Among other atrocities. Robert was gathering evidence of a pattern, Caldwell and others using Army resources to clear valuable land of native populations, then acquiring those lands through shell companies once the territories were declared pacified. And Hannah is living proof of Robert's connection to the Comanche," Eleanor realized. "Evidence that he had reason to protect them beyond simple humanity." "Which is why Caldwell wants her eliminated along with the documents," Jackson confirmed. "She represents a threat to the narrative they've constructed, that they were simply following orders, securing the frontier for American expansion." Eleanor felt a surge of protective rage unlike anything she had experienced before. "They will never touch her," she vowed. "Never." "I believe you," Jackson said softly. "You have Robert's determination. It's why he chose you, why he trusted you with his most precious secret." Eleanor gazed at Hannah's sleeping form, this child who had been hers in every way that mattered for 14 years. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. Hannah was still her daughter. But now she was also something more, a living link to a history of injustice that powerful men had tried to bury. "Does she know," Eleanor asked Jackson, "about her true parentage?" "I don't think so," Jackson replied. "Robert wanted to protect her from that knowledge until she was old enough to understand its implications and its dangers." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Then we keep it that way for now, until this is over." "Agreed." Eleanor rose, her decision made. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we retrieve Robert's evidence and finish what he started. As Jackson drifted into an exhausted sleep, Eleanor moved to sit beside Stone at the cabin door. Outside, the night was alive with the sounds of the wilderness, the hooting of an owl, the distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of wind through pine needles. "You heard?" she asked quietly. Stone nodded, his expression grave. "Every word." "Does it change things for you?" "No," he answered after a moment's consideration. "If anything, it makes what your husband tried to do even more important. The truth needs to come out regardless of who it hurts." Eleanor studied the Pinkerton agent's face in the dim light. "Why are you really helping us, Mr. Stone? This goes beyond professional duty." Stone was silent for so long that Eleanor thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of personal history. "My wife was Lakota Kunk," he said simply. "She died in a similar pacification operation 3 years ago. Different territory, different commander, but the same pattern. Land with resources, native populations in the way, unofficial orders to remove the problem." "I'm sorry," Eleanor said, understanding now the depth of his commitment. Stone acknowledged her sympathy with a slight nod. "When I learned what your husband had tried to do, the evidence he'd gathered, I saw a chance to expose not just one incident, but an entire system. To ensure that what happened to my wife's people, to Hannah's mother's people, couldn't happen again without consequences." They sat in companionable silence for a time, united by shared purpose, if not shared history. Eventually, Eleanor spoke again. "If we succeed, if we find the evidence and bring it to light, what then? Caldwell has powerful friends, as you said." "We take it to the right people," Stone replied. "There are still honest men in government, in the press, men who would be appalled by what Caldwell and his associates have done. And the gold, that's your decision. It was stolen from the government, but using it to line the pockets of corrupt officials was the greater theft." Stone glanced at her. "Your husband must have had a plan for it." Eleanor thought of Robert, his sense of justice, his compassion for those who had suffered under men like Caldwell. "I think I know what he would want." The night deepened around them. In the distance, a shooting star traced a brief, brilliant path across the sky before vanishing. Eleanor followed its trajectory, reminded of how quickly life could blaze and then be extinguished. Robert, 2 rivers, all those who had died because they stood in the way of men like Caldwell. "Get some sleep," Stone told her gently. "I'll wake you for the second watch." Eleanor nodded, settling herself near Hannah's sleeping form. But sleep proved elusive. Her mind kept returning to the revelations of the day, to Hannah's true parentage, to the full scope of what Robert had discovered and tried to expose. And beneath it all, a growing determination. Caldwell and his associates had taken everything from her, her husband, her home, her sense of security. They had threatened her daughter. They had killed without remorse or consequence. No more. As the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky, Eleanor rose, her decision solidified into unshakable resolve. They would find the gold and the documents. They would expose Caldwell's crimes, and they would ensure that justice, long delayed but never forgotten, would finally be served. The day began with a cold breakfast of jerky and hardtack eaten quickly while they prepared to move out. Jackson was weak but determined, insisting he could ride. Eleanor changed his bandages one last time, pleased to see the wound looking cleaner, the infection receding. "How far to the coordinates in the journal?" she asked Stone as they saddled the horses. "A day's hard ride, maybe more depending on the terrain," he replied. "The map shows a path through the mountains, but it won't be easy going." Hannah approached Robert's journal, clutched in her hands. "I've been studying the entries again," she said. "There's something about a waterfall, a cave behind it where the gold is hidden." Eleanor nodded, impressed once more by her daughter's insight. "Good work. That matches the marking on the scabbard. To see here." She traced a wavy line that resembled falling water. They mounted up, Eleanor taking a final look at the cabin that had provided them crucial shelter. Then they rode west toward the distant mountains that held Robert's secret, and Eleanor hoped the key to justice for all who had suffered at Caldwell's hands. The day's journey took them through increasingly rugged terrain. The trail narrowed, winding through pine forests and across rocky slopes. By midday, they had climbed high enough that the air grew noticeably cooler, the vegetation changing to reflect the higher altitude. Jackson rode silently, conserving his strength, but his color was better than it had been the previous day. The fever had broken completely, and though the wound would take time to fully heal, he was out of immediate danger. They stopped briefly at midday to rest the horses and eat a cold lunch. Stone studied the combined map they had created from the journal coordinates, the sword scabbard, and Jackson's tattoo. "We're close," he announced. "Maybe 5 miles from the location marked on the map. But the approach looks difficult." Eleanor examined the map over his shoulder. "There's a valley here," she noted, tracing the contour lines, "with a river running through it. That must be where the waterfall is located. And likely where Caldwell will expect us to go," Stone added grimly, "if he's following the same map." "He doesn't have all the pieces," Jackson reminded them. "Without my tattoo, he can't know the exact location." "He doesn't need the exact location if he finds us first," Stone countered. "We should assume he's close behind." Eleanor nodded, scanning the surrounding forest with newfound wariness. "Then we keep moving. The sooner we reach the cave, the better." They had just remounted when Hannah suddenly raised her hand for silence. "Listen," she whispered. They froze, straining to hear whatever had caught the girl's attention. At first, Eleanor heard nothing but the wind through the pines and the occasional call of a bird. Then it came the distant sound of horses moving through the undergrowth, branches snapping under hooves. "Riders," Stone confirmed, his expression grim. "At least 4, maybe more." "Caldwell?" Eleanor asked, though she already knew the answer. Stone nodded. "Most likely. They're coming from the east, the direction we came from." "They found the cabin," Jackson concluded. "Tracked us from there." Eleanor made a swift decision. "We split up. Hannah and I will continue toward the waterfall. You two create a false trail, lead them away, then circle back to meet us." Stone frowned. "It's too dangerous for you and Hannah to go alone." "We don't have a choice," Eleanor insisted. "Jackson isn't strong enough for a prolonged chase, and I need someone who knows these mountains to guide Hannah if something happens to me." "Mama, no," Hannah protested. "We stay together." Eleanor took her daughter's hand. "Listen to me. What we're doing is bigger than just us now. Those documents your father hid could bring justice to countless people who have suffered because of men like Caldwell. We can't risk losing everything now." After a moment of tense silence, Stone nodded reluctantly. "She's right. It's our best chance." Fine. He pulled a map from his saddlebag and handed it to Eleanor. "Follow this route to the valley. We'll create a diversion, then meet you at the waterfall before nightfall." "If we're not there by full dark," Eleanor said. "Don't wait. Get the documents and the gold and take them to safety." Stone held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded once more. "Be careful." "You too." Eleanor and Hannah rode west, following a game trail that wound deeper into the mountains. Behind them, Stone and Jackson headed south, making no effort to conceal their trail, creating an obvious target for their pursuers to follow. The plan was risky, Eleanor knew, but it offered their best chance of reaching Robert's cache before Caldwell could stop them. And right now, that was all that mattered. As they rode, Hannah remained unusually quiet, her young face set in determined lines. Finally, she spoke. "Jackson told you something last night. About me." Eleanor glanced sharply at her daughter. "You were awake," Hannah nodded. "I heard everything. About my real mother. About why Father brought me to you." Eleanor reined her horse to a stop. "Hannah?" "It's all right, Mama," Hannah said with a maturity beyond her years. "I always knew I was adopted. I just didn't know the whole story." "Your father wanted to protect you," Eleanor explained gently. "We both did." "I know." Hannah's eyes, so like Robert's, met Eleanor's steadily. "And now I understand why this is so important. Why we have to find the evidence and stop Caldwell. It's not just about clearing Father's name. It's about justice for my mother's people too." Eleanor felt a surge of pride mixed with sorrow. Hannah had lost so much: her birth mother, her father, and now her home. Yet here she was facing the truth with courage and clarity. "You are your father's daughter," Eleanor said softly. "And mine. Never doubt that." Hannah smiled, a brief but genuine expression. "I don't. Now let's find that waterfall." They rode on the terrain, growing increasingly difficult as they descended into the valley marked on the map. The sound of rushing water reached them before they saw the river, a powerful, fast-moving current that cut through the heart of the valley. "The waterfall should be upstream," Eleanor said, consulting the map, "to the northwest." They followed the river, keeping to the cover of the trees that lined its banks. The roar of falling water grew louder as they approached, until finally they rounded a bend and saw it, a magnificent cascade tumbling from a cliff wished about 40 feet high but crashing into a churning pool below. There, Hannah pointed to a narrow ledge visible behind the edge of the waterfall, a path leading behind the falls. Eleanor studied the approach. It would be treacherous, the rocks slick with spray, the ledge barely wide enough for a person to edge along sideways. But it was there just as Robert's map had indicated. We wait for Stone and Jackson, she decided. It's too dangerous to attempt alone. They secured their horses in a small clearing sheltered by pines, then found a vantage point from which they could watch both the waterfall and their back trail. As the hours passed with no sign of the men, Eleanor's concern grew. Had Caldwell caught them? Or had they simply been delayed by the need to create a convincing, false trail? The sun was low on the horizon when Hannah suddenly stiffened beside her. "Riders," she whispered, pointing to the eastern end of the valley. Eleanor raised her field glasses, another of Robert's possessions she had salvaged from last water. Through them, she could clearly see 5 riders making their way along the river. At their head rode a figure in a long black coat and wide-brimmed hat. Preacher. And beside him, his distinctive silver-templed profile unmistakable, even at this distance, was Judge Augustus Caldwell. "They found us," Eleanor breathed. But how? The answer came in the form of a 6th rider who appeared from the trees behind the others. Gabriel Stone, his hands bound before him, his face bloodied, but his posture still proud. Eleanor's heart sank. Stone had been captured, and now he was leading Caldwell directly to them. "What about Jackson?" Hannah asked, fear evident in her voice. "I don't see him," Eleanor replied, scanning the group again. "He might have escaped." Or, she didn't complete the thought. There was no time for speculation now. Caldwell and his men were less than half a mile away and closing rapidly. "We have to reach the cave," Eleanor decided, "now, before they get here." They moved quickly down to the river, staying low and using the boulders along the shore as cover. The roar of the waterfall would mask any sound they made, but they remained exposed to view from the approaching riders. "Wait for my signal," Eleanor instructed Hannah when they reached the pool at the base of the falls. "When I wave, run to the ledge as fast as you can. Don't stop. Don't look back." Hannah nodded, her face pale but resolute. Eleanor peered around the boulder shielding them. Caldwell's group had stopped about 200 yards away. They appeared to be arguing, Caldwell gesturing angrily toward Stone. It was the distraction they needed. "Now," Eleanor signaled, and they broke cover simultaneously, sprinting toward the narrow ledge that disappeared behind the curtain of falling water. A shout went up from Caldwell's men. Gunfire erupted, bullets striking the rocks around them as they ran. Eleanor pushed Hannah ahead of her, shielding her daughter with her body as they reached the ledge. "Keep going," she urged, as they edged sideways along the slippery stone, the spray from the falls soaking them instantly. The ledge narrowed further as they moved behind the waterfall, the rock face pressing them forward toward the thundering curtain of water. For a terrifying moment, Eleanor thought they had made a mistake, that there was no cave, just a dead end that would trap them against their pursuers. Then Hannah disappeared through a dark opening, barely visible in the gloom behind the falls. Eleanor followed, finding herself in a low-ceilinged tunnel that extended back into the cliff face. "Mama, look," Hannah's voice echoed strangely in the confined space. Eleanor followed her daughter's gaze. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber about 20 feet ahead. And there, stacked against the far wall, were wooden crates bearing the stamp of the United States Army. Robert's cash. They had found it. But their moment of triumph was short-lived. From outside came the sound of splashing water and angry voices. Caldwell's men had reached the base of the falls and were preparing to follow them onto the ledge. "Quick," Eleanor urged, drawing her pistol. "Help me find the documents." They moved into the larger chamber, taking in its contents with swift glances. Besides the crates of gold coins, the cave contained a leather trunk, several boxes of ammunition, and what appeared to be surveying equipment. Hannah went straight to the leather trunk, opening it to reveal stacks of papers, maps, and bound journals. "This is it," she breathed. "Father's evidence." Eleanor joined her, quickly scanning the topmost documents. They were exactly as Jackson had described, detailed records of meetings, orders, financial transactions, names, dates, locations. A comprehensive account of corruption that reached from the frontier territories to Washington itself. "Take what's most important," Eleanor instructed, handing Hannah her saddlebag. "We can't carry it all." As Hannah sorted through the documents, Eleanor took up position near the tunnel entrance, pistol ready. Outside, she could hear men on the ledge, their voices raised against the roar of the falls. "They're coming," she warned. "Hurry." Hannah worked quickly, selecting key documents and stuffing them into the saddlebag. What about the gold? Leave it, Eleanor decided. The evidence is what matters. Just as Hannah secured the last of the selected documents, a figure appeared in the tunnel entrance. Eleanor raised her pistol, then lowered it slightly as she recognized the newcomer. Jackson, she exclaimed in disbelief. But the man who staggered into the cave was barely recognizable as the Jackson she knew. His face was a mask of blood, one eye swollen shut. His shirt was torn and soaked with fresh blood from his reopened wound. Run, he gasped, collapsing against the cave wall. Caldwell, right behind me. Eleanor moved to support him, but Jackson waved her away. No time, take Hannah, the back exit. He gestured weakly toward the rear of the cave. Robert showed me, years ago. We're not leaving you, Eleanor insisted. Jackson's one good eye fixed on her with desperate intensity. You must. For Hannah, for Robert. Before Eleanor could argue further, another figure appeared in the tunnel entrance. Judge Augustus Caldwell stood silhouetted against the glow of the setting sun, filtering through the waterfall, his pistol aimed directly at Eleanor's heart. Mrs. Hargrove, he said, his cultured voice carrying easily over the waterfall's roar. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Time seemed to slow as Eleanor stared down the barrel of Caldwell's pistol. Behind her, Hannah clutched the saddlebag filled with Robert's evidence, her breath coming in short, frightened gasps. To her left, Jackson slumped against the cave wall, blood trickling from his reopened wounds. I must admit, Caldwell said, stepping fully into the cave, you've led me on quite a chase, Eleanor. Robert would have been proud. Don't speak his name, Eleanor replied, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. You lost that right when you ordered his death. Caldwell's smile never reached his eyes. Such dramatics. Robert was a soldier. He understood that sacrifices must be made for the greater good. The greater good, Eleanor's grip tightened on her pistol, though she kept it lowered. Caldwell's was already aimed. You mean your pockets, your land speculation, your political ambitions? Progress, my dear. Caldwell gestured expansively with his free hand. This country wasn't built by the timid or the sentimental. The natives were always going to lose their lands. Men like me simply ensured those lands went to the right people. From the tunnel entrance came the sound of boots on stone. Preacher appeared behind Caldwell, followed by two more of the Rattlesnake gang. Stone was not among them. The others, Caldwell inquired without taking his eyes off Eleanor. Securing the perimeter, Preacher reported. No sign of the Pinkerton man. Must have slipped his bonds. A flash of annoyance crossed Caldwell's features. Find him. He doesn't leave this valley alive. As Preacher dispatched one of the men back outside, Eleanor's mind raced. Stone was free. That gave them a slim chance at least. But first they needed to survive the immediate threat. What now, Augustus? She asked, playing for time. You kill us all. Add 3 more bodies to your conscience. My conscience is quite intact, thank you, Caldwell replied. As for what happens next, that depends entirely on you. His gaze shifted to the saddlebag Hannah clutched. The documents, if you please. Eleanor positioned herself more firmly in front of Hannah. And if we refuse, then things become unnecessarily messy. Caldwell's voice hardened. The girl first, I think, then your wounded friend. You'll watch both die before I put a bullet in you. Don't test him, Eleanor, Jackson warned weakly from where he leaned against the wall. He'll do it. I've seen it before. Caldwell's cold gaze moved to Jackson. The prodigal brother, Robert's secret shame. How fitting that you should be here for the end of his pathetic crusade. My only shame, Jackson replied through bloodied lips, is that I didn't kill you years ago when I had the chance. Yes, well, Caldwell's smile was reptilian. We all have our regrets. Eleanor's mind worked frantically, assessing their options. The cave had only one visible entrance, the tunnel through which they'd entered, but Jackson had mentioned a back exit. If she could keep Caldwell talking, give Hannah time to find it. Why the gold? She asked suddenly. Why keep it all these years? Surely the documents were the real threat. A calculating look crossed Caldwell's face as he decided how much to reveal. Insurance, my dear. In our line of work, loyalty is purchased, not earned. The gold ensured my associates remained committed to our mutual interests. And those interests included massacring innocent people. Eleanor said, her voice laced with contempt. Women, children, like Hannah's mother. A flicker of surprise showed in Caldwell's eyes. So you know about the girl's parentage. I know everything, Eleanor bluffed. Robert left nothing to chance. While they spoke, Eleanor had been slowly, imperceptibly shifting her position, angling herself to block Hannah from Caldwell's direct line of sight. Now, with a barely perceptible movement, she nudged her daughter backward toward the deeper recesses of the cave. Hannah Blesser understood immediately. She began edging away step by silent step deeper into the shadows. It doesn't matter what you know, Caldwell said dismissively. The documents now, or I start shooting. You'll shoot anyway, Eleanor replied, maintaining eye contact to keep his attention fixed on her. We both know that. Perhaps Caldwell conceded, but the manner of your dying is still negotiable. Quick and clean or slow and painful. Your choice. From the corner of her eye, Eleanor saw Hannah disappear into a dark crevice at the back of the cave. She allowed herself a moment of hope. If the girl could find the exit Jackson had mentioned, she might escape with the evidence. But her relief was short-lived. Preacher, more observant than his employer, had noticed the movement. The girl? He shouted, lunging past Caldwell toward the back of the cave. Everything happened at once. Jackson, summoning strength born of desperation, launched himself at Preacher, tackling the larger man to the ground despite his injuries. Eleanor raised her pistol and fired at Caldwell, the shot going wide as he dove for cover behind a stack of crates. Hannah, run, Eleanor shouted, firing again to keep Caldwell pinned down. The remaining outlaw returned fire, forcing Eleanor to duck behind a boulder. Across the cave, Jackson and Preacher were locked in a life-or-death struggle, rolling dangerously close to the cave entrance and the thundering waterfall beyond. Find the girl, Caldwell ordered from his position. The documents cannot leave this cave. The outlaw moved toward the back of the cave where Hannah had disappeared. Eleanor took careful aim and fired. The man screamed, clutching his leg as he fell. Caldwell seized the opportunity to make a dash for better cover firing as line boomed. Eleanor felt a searing pain as a bullet grazed her upper arm. She ignored it, focusing instead on the sight of Preacher gaining the upper hand in his struggle with Jackson. The outlaw leader had pinned Jackson beneath him and was pressing a knife toward his throat. Eleanor fired her last bullet. Preacher jerked, then went limp, collapsing on top of Jackson. In the momentary lull that followed, she heard Hannah's voice from the back of the cave. Mama, I found it. The back way out. Go, Eleanor called back desperately, searching for more ammunition. Take the evidence. Find Stone. Not without you. I'll follow. Go now. A shot rang out, the bullet striking Stone inches from Eleanor's head. Caldwell had reloaded and was firing from behind an outcropping of rock. No one leaves Eleanor, he shouted. This ends here. Jackson had managed to push Preacher's body off him and was crawling toward Eleanor, leaving a smear of blood on the cave floor. His face was a mask of pain, but his eyes burned with determination. The sword, he gasped when he reached her. Get the sword. Eleanor looked around wildly. The cavalry saber Two Rivers had given her lay where she had dropped it near the cave entrance when they first discovered the gold. Why Buishrain? She asked, ducking as another bullet ricocheted off the rock above them. Trust me, Jackson urged. The sword. Eleanor waited for a pause in Caldwell's firing, then made a desperate lunge for the weapon. Her fingers closed around the scabbard just as a bullet struck the ground where her hand had been a second earlier. She scrambled back to Jackson's side, the sword clutched in her grip. Now what? Jackson's bloodied hand closed over hers on the sword hilt. Robert showed me, he whispered. A final surprise. For emergencies. With trembling fingers, he guided her hand to a small, almost invisible catch on the sword's pommel. When pressed, it released a hidden compartment within the hilt itself. From this compartment rolled a single object, a small brass key. The detonators, Jackson explained, his voice fading as his strength ebbed. Robert rigged the cave in case the wrong people found it first. Understanding dawned on Eleanor. Explosives, Jackson nodded weakly. In the walls, behind the gold. Turn the key, in the lock. By the entrance. Caldwell's voice cut through the whispered conversation. Whatever you're planning, Eleanor, it won't work. There's nowhere to go. Surrender the documents, and perhaps the girl can live. Eleanor glanced toward the back of the cave where Hannah had disappeared. Had she made it out? Found the back exit? Or was she still trapped somewhere in the darkness? She had to assume Hannah had escaped, had to believe her daughter was safe. The alternative was unthinkable. The lock, Jackson prompted again, his voice barely audible now. By the entrance. Metal box. Looks like a survey marker. Eleanor spotted it, a small metal box bolted to the rock wall near the tunnel entrance. It would mean exposing herself to Caldwell's fire, but if Jackson was right, cover me, she told him, pressing her reloaded pistol into his hand. Jackson nodded grimly, summoning his last reserves of strength to provide covering fire while Eleanor made her move. Caldwell, Jackson called out, his voice stronger than seemed possible given his condition. You want to know what Robert's last words were before your men shot him? Enlighten me, Caldwell replied, his tone mocking. He said you'd die a coward's death, buried under the weight of your own greed. As Jackson spoke, drawing Caldwell's attention, Eleanor darted toward the cave entrance. Bullets struck the rock around her, but she kept moving, reaching the small metal box Jackson had indicated. The key fit perfectly. She turned it, heard a series of clicks, then a low mechanical whirring sound. What was that? Caldwell demanded, suddenly alert. What have you done? Eleanor returned to Jackson's side, helping him to his feet. How long? She asked urgently. 2 minutes, he replied. Maybe less. Robert didn't believe in taking chances. Eleanor, Caldwell's voice had lost its composure. Whatever you have activated, stop it now. You wanted the gold Augustus? Eleanor called back. It's all yours, every blood-soaked coin of it. A deep rumbling sound came from within the cave walls. Small stones and dust began to rain down from the ceiling. The charges Robert had set years ago were ancient, but still functional. We need to get out, Eleanor urged, supporting Jackson as they staggered toward the back of the cave where Hannah had disappeared. Behind them, Caldwell emerged from his cover, his face contorted with rage and fear. Stop! There's enough gold here to make us all rich. We can come to an arrangement. Eleanor didn't bother to respond. She and Jackson had reached the narrow crevice Hannah had used. It was tight, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through sideways, but it was their only hope. You first, she told Jackson, helping him maneuver his wounded body into the opening. Eleanor, please. Caldwell was approaching now. His pistol lowered, his expression desperate. Be reasonable. The explosives will bring down the entire cave system. That's the idea, Eleanor replied coldly. Buried under the weight of your own greed, just as Robert predicted. The rumbling intensified. Larger chunks of rock were falling now, one striking Caldwell on the shoulder and driving him to his knees. The cave was minutes, perhaps seconds from collapse. Eleanor squeezed into the crevice behind Jackson, using her body to shield him from the falling debris. The passage was dark and narrow, forcing them to move sideways inch by painful inch. Behind them, Caldwell's panicked shouts were drowned out by the increasing roar of shifting rock. Then came a tremendous crash as the first major section of the ceiling gave way. The force of the collapse sent a pressure wave through the narrow passage, nearly knocking Eleanor off her feet. Dust filled the air, choking them, making it impossible to see more than a few inches ahead. Keep moving, she urged Jackson, though she could barely hear her own voice over the continuing rumble of the cave-in. The passage seemed endless, winding deeper into the cliff face before beginning a gradual ascent. Jackson stumbled repeatedly, his strength finally giving out. Eleanor half-dragged, half-carried him, refusing to leave him behind. Just when she thought they could go no further, the passage widened. Fresh air brushed her dust-covered face. Ahead, she could make out a faint glow of natural light. We're almost there, she encouraged Jackson, though she wasn't sure he could hear her. His body had become dead weight against her side. With one final effort, Eleanor pulled them both through the narrow exit, a fissure in the rock face hidden behind a stand of scrub pine on the cliff above the waterfall. They emerged into the fading daylight, collapsing onto the rocky ground as the earth continued to tremble beneath them. For several long moments, Eleanor simply lay there, gulping in the sweet, clean air. Then a shadow fell across her face. Mama. Hannah knelt beside her, face streaked with tears and dust. Behind her stood Gabriel Stone, his own face bloodied, but his eyes alert. You made it, Eleanor breathed, reaching up to touch her daughter's cheek. The documents. Hannah patted the saddlebag still slung across her body. Safe. All of it. Stone moved to check Jackson, who lay unnaturally still beside Eleanor. He's alive, the Pinkerton agent reported after a moment. But barely. We need to get him to a doctor. Eleanor struggled to sit up, wincing at the pain in her arm where Caldwell's bullet had grazed her. Caldwell, still inside when the charges went off, Stone confirmed. The entire cave system collapsed. No one could have survived. Eleanor looked back at the cliff face. A plume of dust rose from the area where the cave entrance had been now buried under tons of rock. The waterfall still flowed, but it had been diverted by the collapse, creating a new path down the cliff face. The gold, she asked. Buried, Stone said. Perhaps for the best. Too many good men have died over it already. Eleanor nodded, her gaze returning to Jackson's still form. Despite their short acquaintance, she felt a deep connection to this man, her husband's brother, Hannah's uncle. He had risked everything to help them to fulfill the promise he'd made to Robert years ago. We need to move, Stone urged, helping Eleanor to her feet. Caldwell's remaining men will be looking for us. How many are left? Eleanor asked as she brushed dust from her clothes. 2, maybe 3. I took care of the others. Stone's expression was grim. They didn't leave me much choice. Eleanor understood. In this harsh land, sometimes there were no good options, only necessary ones. The horses, she asked. Hidden about half a mile from here, Hannah supplied. Where Stone found me right after I got out of the cave. We were coming back for you when the explosion happened. Eleanor squeezed her daughter's hand gratefully. Let's go then. Jackson needs medical attention. And we need to get those documents somewhere safe. Together they fashioned a crude stretcher for Jackson using branches and Stone's coat. The going was slow and difficult over the rough terrain, but they eventually reached the horses without encountering any of Caldwell's remaining men. As they secured Jackson to one of the horses, Eleanor noticed Hannah studying his face with a thoughtful expression. He has father's eyes, the girl observed quietly. Eleanor nodded. Yes, he does. Will he live? If we get him to a doctor soon, Eleanor replied honestly, and if he has even half your father's stubbornness, he just might pull through. A ghost of a smile touched Hannah's lips. Where will we go? It was a question Eleanor had been pondering since they emerged from the cave. They couldn't return to Redemption, not with Caldwell's influence still potentially lingering there. And Lastwater was nothing but ashes now. I know a place, Stone offered. A small town called Mercy, about 2 days' ride from here. The local doctor owes me a favor, and the sheriff isn't on Caldwell's payroll. And the documents, Eleanor asked. Where will they be safe? Stone's expression turned thoughtful. There's a federal marshal and Mercy man named Cooper. He's honest from everything I've heard. If anyone can get those papers to the right people in Washington, it's him. Eleanor considered their options, which were admittedly few. Mercy it is then. They set out as the last light faded from the sky, riding slowly due to Jackson's condition. Eleanor kept close watch on him, stopping periodically to check his wounds and give him water. His fever had returned, and he drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes murmuring Robert's name or fragments of prayers long forgotten. They made camp that night in a sheltered canyon building, only the smallest of fires to avoid detection. While Hannah slept exhausted by the day's events, Eleanor and Stone kept watch, their conversation turning inevitably to what would happen next. Even with the documents, Stone said quietly, there's no guarantee the men behind Caldwell will face justice. They have powerful friends. I know, Eleanor acknowledged, but we have to try we may, for Robert, for Two Rivers, for all those who died because they stood in the way of men like Caldwell. Stone studied her face in the dim firelight. And after, what will you and Hannah do then? It was a question Eleanor hadn't allowed herself to consider until now. The past few days had been consumed by survival, by the desperate need to find Hannah and secure Robert's evidence. But now, with those immediate goals accomplished, the future loomed uncertain before her. I don't know, she admitted. Lastwater is gone. Everything we built there, you could rebuild, Stone suggested, or start fresh somewhere else. Eleanor's gaze moved to where Jackson lay wrapped in blankets, his breathing shallow but steady. Much depends on whether he survives. He's Hannah's bloodkin now, the only family she has left besides me. Family is more than blood, Stone observed, as you and Robert proved with Hannah. Eleanor nodded, acknowledging the truth in his words. Still, she deserves to know her heritage. Both sides of it. Jackson could help with that if he lives. They fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts as the night deepened around them. Eventually, Stone spoke again. Get some rest. I'll take first watch. Eleanor didn't argue. The events of the past few days had caught up with her, and exhaustion pulled at her with leaden hands. She settled beside Hannah, drawing comfort from her daughter's steady breathing. Sleep, when it came, brought dreams of Robert not as he had been in his final days, burdened by the weight of what he had discovered, but as she had first known him, confident, principled, his eyes alight with the certainty that justice and truth would ultimately prevail. "You were right," she told him in the dream. "I found it, all of it." Robert smiled, that familiar half-smile that had always made her heart skip. "I never doubted you would, Ellie." "What now?" she asked. "Where do we go from here?" But Dream Robert only touched her cheek gently before fading away, leaving the question unanswered. Eleanor woke with tears on her face and the lingering sensation of his touch. The journey to Mercy took 3 days rather than the 2 Stone had estimated. Jackson's condition deteriorated on the 2nd day, necessitating more frequent stops and slower progress. By the time they reached the small town nestled in a green valley, he was delirious with fever, his wounds showing signs of serious infection despite Eleanor's best efforts. Mercy proved to be aptly named. The town doctor, a grizzled Civil War veteran named Hollister, took one look at Jackson and immediately set to work, his experienced hands moving with the same efficient precision Eleanor recognized from her own training. "He's strong," Hollister told her after stabilizing Jackson's condition, "and stubborn. 2 qualities that serve a man well out here." "Will he live?" Eleanor asked directly, too tired for pleasantries. Hollister's weathered face softened. "If he makes it through the night, his chances are good. You did well keeping the wounds clean as you could. Saved him from gangrene at least." While Eleanor and Hannah stayed with Jackson Stone when in search of Marshall Cooper. He returned several hours later accompanied by a tall man with iron-gray hair and the watchful eyes of someone who had seen too much of humanity's darker nature. Mrs. Hargrove, Stone made the introductions. "This is Federal Marshal James Cooper." "Marshal, this is Eleanor Hargrove and her daughter Hannah." Cooper tipped his hat respectfully. "Ma'am, Miss, Stone has told me some of what you've been through. I'm sorry for your troubles." Eleanor studied the marshal's face, looking for any sign of duplicity or hidden agenda. She found none, only a straightforward honesty that reminded her painfully of Robert. "Mr. Stone says you can be trusted with sensitive information," she said carefully. "Information that implicates powerful men in serious crimes." Cooper nodded, his expression grave. "I've spent 20 years bringing criminals to justice, Mrs. Hargrove. Don't much care what titles they hold or how much money they have. Law's the same for everyone, far as I'm concerned." Eleanor exchanged a glance with Stone, who gave a slight nod of encouragement. She turned to Hannah. "The saddlebag, please." Hannah retrieved the precious documents they had recovered from the cave. Eleanor placed them on the table between herself and the marshal. "These papers detail a conspiracy involving the theft of Union Army gold during the final days of the Civil War," she explained. "The gold was used to finance unofficial military operations against native tribes in the territory's operations designed to clear valuable land for mining and railroad interests." Cooper began examining the documents, his expression growing increasingly troubled as he read. "These names," he said finally, "some of them are currently serving in Congress. Others hold high military rank or judicial appointments." "Yes," Eleanor confirmed, "which is why we weren't certain who we could trust with this information." Cooper looked up, his eyes meeting hers directly. "You can trust me, Mrs. Hargrove. These men will answer for their crimes. I give you my word on that." "Even if it takes years," Eleanor pressed. "Even if they use every bit of their influence to discredit you to bury the evidence." A grim smile touched Cooper's lips. "I'm not easily intimidated, ma'am. And I have friends in Washington who feel the same way about justice as I do. It may take time, but the truth has a way of coming out eventually." Eleanor felt a weight lift from her shoulders, the burden she had carried since finding Robert's letter in the ruins of Last Water. She had fulfilled her part of the bargain. The rest was in the hands of men like Cooper. "There's one more thing," she said, reaching into her coat to withdraw a folded document she had kept separate from the others. "This is a letter from my husband detailing his findings and naming those responsible for his death. I'd like you to include it in the official record." Cooper accepted the letter with appropriate solemnity. "I'll see that it's done, Mrs. Hargrove. Your husband's sacrifice won't be forgotten." After Cooper left with the documents, Eleanor felt oddly directionless. The mission that had driven her these past days was complete. Now she had to face the more mundane but no less daunting challenge of rebuilding a life for herself and Hannah. For the next 3 days, they remained in Mercy, waiting for Jackson's condition to improve. On the fourth morning, Dr. Hollister announced that the fever had broken and the infection was receding. "He's asking for you, Pa," the doctor told Eleanor. "Seems to have something important on his mind." Eleanor found Jackson propped up in bed, his face pale but his eyes clear for the first time in days. The family resemblance to Robert seemed stronger now, without pain and fever to distort his features. "You look better," she observed, taking the chair beside his bed. "Feel like I've been trampled by a herd of buffalo," Jackson replied with a weak smile. "But I'll live, thanks to you." Eleanor shook her head. "I just patched you up. Your own stubbornness did the rest." A comfortable silence fell between them. Then Jackson spoke again, his voice stronger than Eleanor had expected. "I've been thinking about what happens next." "So have I," Eleanor admitted, "though I haven't reached any conclusions." Jackson's pale blue eyes, so like Robert's, studied her face. "I have a place, ranch about 100 miles east of here. Nothing fancy, but there's good water, decent grazing land. Could be a new start. For all of us." The offer caught Eleanor by surprise. "All of us?" "You, Hannah, me," Jackson clarified. "We're family after all, or could be if you're willing." Eleanor considered his words carefully. "You're suggesting what exactly?" A faint flush colored Jackson's pale cheeks. "Nothing improper. Separate houses. I'd build you and Hannah your own place on the property. But we'd work the land together, build something that could be Hannah's inheritance someday." It was a practical suggestion born of frontier pragmatism rather than romantic notions. Two people with complementary skills joining forces to survive in a harsh land. And yet there was something more in Jackson's eyes, a loneliness that matched her own, a desire for connection that went beyond mere survival. "You barely know us," Eleanor pointed out, "and we barely know you." "I know enough," Jackson replied simply. "You're the woman Robert loved, the mother he chose for his daughter. That tells me everything important about your character." Eleanor found herself unexpectedly moved by his words. "And Hannah, how does she feel about this arrangement?" A smile touched Jackson's lips. "She's been visiting me every day, asking about her father, about our childhood, about the Comanche side of her heritage." He paused. "She's a remarkable young woman. You've raised her well." "I had help," Eleanor said softly, thinking of Robert. "Will you at least consider it?" Jackson asked. "The ranch, a fresh start." Eleanor rose from the chair, needing space to think. "I'll consider it, but first you need to focus on getting well." Jackson nodded, accepting her non-answer with good grace. "I'm not going anywhere for a while, it seems." As Eleanor turned to leave, he spoke again. "One more thing. Stone left something for you with the doctor. Said you'd know what to do with it." Curious, Eleanor sought out Dr. Hollister, who handed her a small package wrapped in oilskin. Inside, she found a leather pouch containing several gold coins, Union Army issue from the cache in the cave. A note in Stone's handwriting accompanied the coins for rebuilding what was lost. "Robert would have wanted you to have this much at least. The rest is better left buried." G.S. Eleanor stared at the coins, conflicted. This was blood money, in many ways tainted by the corruption and violence that had surrounded its theft. And yet Stone was right. Robert would have wanted her to use it to secure Hannah's future. She made her decision then, though she would take time to consider all its implications. Jackson's offer represented the best chance for that future, a fresh start, a connection to Hannah's heritage through her uncle, and the opportunity to build something lasting from the ashes of all they had lost. 2 weeks later, with Jackson sufficiently recovered to travel, they set out for his ranch. Stone had departed days earlier, bound for parts unknown, with a promise to return someday and check on them. Marshal Cooper had sent word that the documents had been safely delivered to trustworthy hands in Washington, and that investigations were already quietly underway. As they rode east, Eleanor felt a strange sense of completion. The journey that had begun with fire and violence at last water was ending with the promise of renewal. She had avenged Robert, secured his legacy, and protected their daughter. Now it was time to look forward rather than back. The ranch, when they reached it, proved to be everything Jackson had described: a modest but well-built house nestled in a valley with plentiful water and good grazing land. A bunkhouse for the handful of cowhands who worked the property stood nearby, along with a barn and corral. It's not much compared to what you had at last water, Jackson apologized as they dismounted in the yard. You know, but it's peaceful, safe. Eleanor surveyed the property, noting its strengths and weaknesses with a practical eye. It has potential, she allowed, though the house could use a woman's touch. Jackson smiled a real smile that transformed his weathered face. Does that mean you're staying? Eleanor glanced at Hannah, who was already exploring the corral, her earlier reticence giving way to genuine interest. We're staying, she confirmed. For now, at least. The rest we'll figure out as we go. That evening, as Hannah slept inside the ranch house, Eleanor sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. Jackson joined her, moving more easily now as his wounds continued to heal. I've been thinking about names, he said after a comfortable silence. Names for the ranch, he clarified. It needs something better than the old Hargrove place, which is what folks around here call it. Eleanor considered for a moment. What about Second Chance? Jackson tested the name silently, then nodded. I like it. Fitting for all of us. Second Chance Ranch, Eleanor said softly. A place to heal, to start over. They sat in companionable silence as the last light faded from the sky, giving way to a canopy of stars. Eleanor found her thoughts turning as they often did to Robert. He would approve of this arrangement, she thought. His wife and daughter, his brother, all finding a way forward together, bound by shared history and common purpose. Thank you, she said, finally breaking the silence, for helping us, for offering us a home. Jackson's hand found hers in the darkness, a tentative touch that asked permission rather than presumed it. Thank you for saving my life and for giving me a family again. Eleanor didn't pull away. The touch was comforting rather than intrusive, a simple human connection after days of danger and uncertainty. Whatever might develop between them, friendship, partnership, or something more would happen in its own time. For now, it was enough to have found safe harbor, to have fulfilled her promise to Robert, to have secured justice for those who had been silenced. As if reading her thoughts, Jackson spoke again. Robert would be proud of you, of what you accomplished. Of what we accomplished, Eleanor corrected gently. I couldn't have done it alone. Few worthwhile things are accomplished alone, Jackson observed. That's why we form families, build communities, to face together what we cannot face alone. Eleanor nodded, finding wisdom in his words. Lastwater had been her and Robert's dream, a place of safety and comfort in a harsh land. Second Chance Ranch could be something similar, but different too. A place not just of shelter, but of healing. Not just of survival, but of growth. In the days and weeks that followed, they settled into a new routine. True to his word, Jackson began construction on a separate house for Eleanor and Hannah, though they continued to share meals and work together on the daily tasks of ranch life. Hannah flourished in the new environment, her natural intelligence finding outlet in learning the skills of frontier life. She developed a particular affinity for horses, spending hours in the corral working with the ranch's stock. Jackson, recognizing her talent, taught her the techniques his Comanche kin had used, techniques Robert had never had the chance to share with his daughter. Eleanor, meanwhile, put her medical skills to use, serving not only the ranch hands, but neighboring homesteads as well. Word spread of the capable doctor woman at Second Chance Ranch, and soon she found herself with a steady stream of patients seeking treatment for everything from minor injuries to childbirths. 6 months after their arrival, Marshal Cooper paid them a visit. The news he brought was both satisfying and sobering. Investigations are proceeding, he told them over dinner in the main house. Slowly but proceeding nonetheless. 2 senators have resigned rather than face inquiries. A judge in Colorado Territory, associate of Caldwell's, took his own life when federal agents arrived with questions. And the others? Eleanor asked. Cooper's expression was grim but determined. Some will escape justice through wealth or influence. That's the unfortunate reality. But not all. The documents you provided have given us leverage against key figures. Men are talking, making deals to save themselves. And the massacres, Jackson asked. Will there be acknowledgement of what was done to the native tribes? Some, Cooper admitted, though not enough. Never enough to balance the scales, but your brother's evidence has forced certain records into the light that would otherwise have remained buried. It wasn't complete justice, nothing could be given, the lives lost and the pain inflicted. But it was something, a reckoning however partial for the crimes Caldwell and his associates had committed. After Cooper departed, promising to keep them informed of further developments, Eleanor found herself drawn to the small cemetery Jackson had established on a hillside overlooking the ranch. There, a simple wooden cross marked a symbolic grave for Robert, though his actual resting place was hundreds of miles away on a battlefield long since returned to pastoral peace. Jackson found her there as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the grassy slope. He said nothing, simply standing beside her in respectful silence. "It's not over," Eleanor said finally. "Not really?" "No," Jackson agreed. "Men like Caldwell, the kind of corruption they represent, don't disappear overnight. But it's a beginning." Eleanor nodded, finding comfort in his understanding. Robert knew that, knew he might not live to see justice done, but he still tried. "As did you," Jackson reminded her, "that you finished what he started, brought truth to light that powerful men wanted kept dark." They stood together as the last rays of sunlight gilded the distant mountains. Below them, smoke rose from the chimney of the main house where Hannah was preparing the evening meal. The scene radiated a peace that had seemed impossible in the desperate days following the attack on Lastwater. "I've been thinking," Eleanor said after a comfortable silence, "about the gold Stone left us." Jackson waited, not pressing her to continue. "I'd like to use it to establish a school," she explained, "here on the ranch initially, but eventually in town, a place where all children can learn regardless of background, including Native children." A smile touched Jackson's lips. Robert would approve. "Yes," Eleanor agreed. "He would." As they walked back toward the house, Eleanor felt a sense of rightness settle over her. The path that had brought her here had been marked by fire and blood, by loss and grief. But it had also revealed strengths she hadn't known she possessed and connections she hadn't expected to find. Lastwater was gone, consumed by the flames of Caldwell's vengeance. But from those ashes had risen something new. Not a replacement for what was lost, but a different kind of sanctuary. A place of second chances, of healing, of looking forward rather than back. The future stretched before them, uncertain in its specifics, but clear in its direction. They would build something here, something worthy of Robert's memory and Hannah's inheritance. A legacy not of gold or land or power, but of justice, truth, and the quiet courage to stand against those who would sacrifice others for their own gain. As they reached the house, Hannah appeared in the doorway, her face lighting up at the sight of them. In that moment, Eleanor knew with bone-deep certainty that they had made the right choice. This was where they belonged now, not dwelling in the past or consumed by vengeance, but moving forward together into whatever the future might hold. The stagecoach stop, known as Lastwater, was gone, burned to ashes by men who valued greed above all else. But Eleanor Hargrove had survived, had pursued those men across desert and mountain with the relentless determination of a woman with nothing left to lose, had brought them to justice in ways both legal and more primal. And now, standing on the porch of what would become her new home with Hannah safe beside her and Jackson, this unexpected connection to Robert nearby, she allowed herself to truly feel what she had accomplished. She had burned their trail to hell just as they had burned her home, had ensured that Caldwell and his kind would never again destroy lives with impunity, had honored Robert's memory in the most fitting way possible by completing the mission he had begun. Now it was time for a different kind of journey, one of rebuilding rather than revenge, of creation rather than destruction, of life asserting itself as it always did in the aftermath of fire. Eleanor Hargrove, nurse, widow, mother, avenger, took a deep breath of the clean evening air and stepped across the threshold into her future. The end.